Stuff on my end looks good. So let us begin with the festivities. Welcome to the 2022 Tournament of Champions Congressional Debate Final. Today we have our final 12 senators and our final 3 presiding officers of the tournament. It has been an action-filled week. It has been an incredible experience, both behind the scenes and hopefully in front of the scenes. And first off, I need to give all of the credit to, whoops, and my light just went off. Oh, well, I need to give all of the credit to the University of Kentucky debate team for hosting the Tournament of Champions. Dr. J.W. Patterson, Tournament Director Emeritus, Dave Arnett, Adrian Bravero, and Brian Manuel as tournament administrators. Our Congressional Debate Tab staff this weekend was Ursula Gruber, Martine Campbell, and Maya Lefkowitz. And we are now ready for the final. Couple of things. First off, judges and competitors and presiding officers, please be aware of any implicit bias that you may have, and please eliminate it over the course of the next few hours. We know that there are biases in terms of, even in this video environment, appearance and video quality, and we all don't have the same internet strength. So let us focus on the content and not nearly as much on the how it might look, in case somebody blips. Secondly, this final will feature 4-minute speeches instead of the 3-minute speeches that we normally have. Questioning times will remain the same. I know that we have a couple of judges who are having some tech issues, and so I can understand them going into low bandwidth. What we are asking for, though, is as much as possible, judges and competitors, please keep cameras on. Judges, it helps us know that you're here and that you haven't, disappeared. And competitors, we are live streaming this round, and I'm sure that people would love to be able to see you. Each competitor will give 2 speeches during this round. Once all competitors have given 2 speeches, the round will conclude. In the event that we wind up with a significant amount of recess, unnecessary recess, the hard stop for the round is at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We have never reached the hard stop, and I do not intend to today. Judges, you have 2 separate ballots. You have one ballot for the 12 senators. That is a traditional congressional debate ballot. Drop down, and with each speech, provide your comments for the competitor, and then give them 1 to 6 points per speech, 6 being, elect them to Congress right now, because they're probably better than anything we currently have. And it would really have to be something significantly wrong to be less than a 3 or 4. You also have a secondary ballot for our presiding officer candidates, who will be judged separately. You do not rank the presiding officer candidates among the other 12. They have their own separate ballot where you will rank them 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Our presiding officer candidates today are Jimmy Beck, Alexander Alakwa, and Zachary Wu. On the computer screen you cannot see, I have their names in random.org, and I'm going to push the button to determine in which order they will preside. Each presiding officer will serve for 8 speeches and then hand off to the next. And the way tournament math works, that's our 24 speeches. The order of presiding will be President Ilakwa, followed by President Wu, followed by President Beck. Are there any questions about the round or the composition before I hand it off to our parliamentarian? All right. In that case, congratulations, everyone. And Madam Parliamentarian, the floor is yours.
All right, I want to thank Mr. Burlap for that. I want to congratulate everybody for making it to the final round. With that, I'm going to open the session at 12:08 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Are there any motions on the floor? Senator Beck. Jay Beck.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a thing, but I moved to open the floor for PO nominations. There should be one, I guess, but yeah.
All seconds. All right, that looks like unanimous consent. Senator Huda.
I move to nominate Senator Lacqua.
Senator Lacqua, do you accept?
I humbly accept.
All right. Do we have any other nominations? Senator Landsman.
Barring all further nominations, I move to close the floor for PO nominations.
Is there a second? That looks like unanimous consent. All right, Senator Lacqua, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Parliamentarian Foster. Hello, everyone. That's Senator Olakwa, spelled I-L-A-C-Q-U-A for my judges. First off, I want to congratulate everyone to making it for the final round at the Tournament of Champions 22. That's very great accomplishment, and everyone should be proud of that. Before I begin explaining my procedure, I just want to make sure before we begin that Judge Natarajan and Judge Nagawate, are you in the room with us?
Yes, and I'm always ready.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Just wanted to verify. So once again, hello everyone. My name is Senator Olakwa. Thank you for selecting me as your PO today. I'm just going to briefly explain my procedure over the next couple of minutes. I like to run my rounds based on the principles of being fair, fast, and equitable. I want to make sure that we're getting through the maximum amount of speeches in the least amount of time possible, while also making sure that everyone in this chamber feels welcome in this debate environment. I'll start off by explaining my procedure for timing. Seeing as we're piloting 4-minute speeches today, it's going to be slightly different than what we were used to through the preliminary rounds of this tournament. At 2 minutes elapsed in your speech, I will hold up this 2-minute time placard. At 3 minutes elapsed in your speech, I'll hold up this 3-minute time placard. At 3 minutes and 30 seconds elapsed, you'll see this 3-minute and 30-second time placard. 3:55. At 4 minutes, I'm going to unmute myself and progressively count you down from 4 minutes to 4 minutes and 10 seconds, where I will then hold up a fist and expect you to promptly end, as we need to continue to make sure so that we don't hit the 4 p.m. hard stop. Questioning timing will be similar. At 20 seconds elapsed in the questioning block, you'll see this 20-second time placard, followed by a countdown from 27 to 30 seconds using my fingers. I do ask that during questions, everyone please be courteous of one another, as in this online platform, it does definitely hinder the debate if you're speaking over one another for the sake of clarity. I will also now be dropping in my spreadsheet where everyone can track the precedence and recency for today's round. That'll be visible in the chat. I'll be choosing speakers first based off randomness. I'll give a few seconds for everyone to lift their placards to ensure that we're maintaining equity during today's chamber and that lag is not a factor in how I select speakers and questioners. After that, I'll be using the principles of precedence. So those who have spoken the least amount of times will have the highest speaking priority, followed by recency. So those who have spoken least recently will then have the highest speaking priority. Likewise, on my sheet, as we attempt to make congressional debating more equitable activity for all, in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a few things linked. The first thing at the top is a content warning form. I do ask that all judges and competitors please fill out this form prior to the beginning of the round, as that way we can see certain topics that may be triggering to members of this round, and definitely things that we should avoid given some of the sensitive natures of the topics on today's docket. It is completely anonymous. If you do not wish to report any type of content to avoid, you can merely press the submit button, after which you can see the results, and on top of that, the content that should be avoided. I've also linked the legislation and the TOC procedures on that document. As far as how I will be handling points of personal privilege, those will be through the chat. Just please make sure to do that in between speeches, again, to limit the amount of disturbances to speakers and questioners. Does anyone have any questions about the round? Senator Juneja.
Hi. So recently, at least over the past 2 days, in the middle of rounds, my computer has started to overheat, and I've had to turn off my camera basically to ensure that my computer can still function and I'll stay in the Zoom room. Is that all right with you? I don't think I'd be able to type in a point of personal privilege, but if you see my camera off for like 1 to 2 minutes, it's only just to get my computer to function again.
In the interest of equity, I would definitely think that is something that is feasible. Parliamentarian, do you have any objection to that?
I do not.
Okay. Then Senator Juneja, that is perfectly okay. Any other questions about the round? Senator Pang.
So for the sake of, say, like tech issues, would it be possible for us to make this an open chamber?
I do believe that that is prohibited by TOC rules. However, if you do need to just briefly turn off your camera, we can definitely support that in the interest of technology. Just please make sure to turn it on as quickly as possible. Any other questions? Seeing none, at 11:14 a.m. Central Time, I call this session into order. Are there any points or motions on the floor? Senator Lensman.
I move to open the floor for docket nominations.
Are there any seconds to that motion? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, so ordered. Are there any nominations? Senator Kaiser.
Hey, I nominate docket A consisting of first legislation B, Western Hemisphere Security Strategy Act of 2022, followed by second legislation C, aid enhancement for Latin America and the Caribbean.
Are there any other nominations? Senator Pang.
I nominate docket B, which consists of FC and then FB.
So that would be aid enhancement, followed by the Western Hemisphere. Are there any other nominations? Senator Beck.
Barring any further docket nominations, I move to close the floor for docket nominations.
All seconds to that motion. Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, so ordered. We do have 2 dockets proposed today, those being docket A, items Western Hemisphere, followed by items regarding aid enhancement, and docket B, which reads the opposite order of docket A. All those in favor of docket A, please raise your placard squarely to the screen. Senator Hassanali, Linesman, Viram, Casado. That's a total of 7. All those in favor of docket B. There is a majority for docket A, therefore that will be adopted as our docket for this round. That reads items Western Hemisphere or legislation FB, followed by an item regarding aid enhancement or item FC. With that, seeing as our first item up for debate today is the Western Hemisphere Security Strategy Act of 2022, we will now enter debate on that item. Are there any sponsors in the House? Are there any sponsors in the House? This is the final round of the 2022 Tournament of Champions. Thank you, Senator Kaiser.
1 minute in-house recess.
Are there any seconds? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, so ordered.
We're getting a quick split going on AF-NEG. If you're AF, just raise a quick placard.
For AF?
Yeah. Okay, and then negs. Okay, it's a pretty even split. AF, so when are y'all planning on speaking? Because we need one of y'all just like get it going.
I can speak relatively early, but I'm not really prepared to sponsor.
Could anyone step up and be
Sponsor
sponsor?
to continue with the round, so I would appreciate if in the next 30 seconds, someone could step up to the plate.
Just a quick question, do we have a sponsor for the second bill?
I was planning on sponsoring FC, which is why I wanted to put it first.
Okay, well, what if we can debate that more readily now? We could table this one for now and just do that first.
I believe it requires a suspension of the rules if we want to untable.
I mean, could we just like, could anyone change
Not
that?
to table, not to table. Switching docket would be suspension. We can just table now.
The in-house recess has expired. Once again, I will call for any sponsorship speeches. Senator Juneja.
I have a motion. I move to table final session bill 2, the Western Hemisphere bill, and move on to the the final bill C, aid expansion.
Are there any seconds to the motion to lay item FB on the table? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, so ordered. Item FB is moved onto the table, and item aid enhancement, or FC, is taken off the table. Seeing as our next item up for debate today is item FC, or more specifically, an item regarding aid enhancement for Latin America and the Caribbean, we will now enter debate on that item. All sponsors, please rise. Senator Pang, thank you.
Thank you. This is Senator Pang, spelled P-A-N-G, speaking for the first time today. I'm just going to take a couple seconds of silence as a sign of readiness. Former President Trump once said that he was extremely suspicious of migrant caravans because they easily could have been infiltrated by terrorists from south of South America, also known as Antarctica. For far too long, we have been wrongly accusing of all immigration coming from our southern border. Our constituents in Latin America are not our enemies. It's time to lend them a helping hand. So first, allow me to contextualize the problem that we're discussing in today's debate, which is the poverty rampant within Latin America. As the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean finds, on January 25th of this year, the COVID-19 pandemic has only worsened the poverty rate in Latin America, with extreme poverty having risen to 13.8% in 2021, representing a 27-year setback. And the overall poverty rate now encompasses over 200 million people. That's why the Pan American Health Organization reports on November 30th of last year that food insecurity affects 41% of the entire population in Latin America. That is 267 million people who are experiencing moderate to severe food insecurity in 2020, an increase of 9 percentage points, the most pronounced rise in the entire world. Our constituents are literally starving for change. You pass my legislation today to finally give it to them. Under Section 1, we allocate $400 million in supplemental funding to U.S. aid for the purpose of supporting Latin America and the entirety of the Caribbean. Here's why that's so important. As the Congressional Research Service reports just last month, with the United States concentrating foreign aid in Latin America, the percentage of people living in poverty has declined from 45 to 30%. But perhaps even most importantly is Section 2, which allocates 40% of that funding to small and mid-sized enterprise. Let's look towards USAID's Haiti Economic Growth January 2020 report, which finds that local businesses are the largest parts of Haiti's economy, creating up to 80% of new jobs. But while it was difficult to survive because they had such few resources and access to financing, we gave them just $12 million to 47 of those businesses and directly created 27,000 new jobs. But how do we ensure that our aid actually gets to where it needs to go? Well, as the Brookings Institute reports in July, in their recent 2020 Aid Transparency Index, U.S. aid, as designated under Section 4, is ranked towards the top of all aid distributors because they publish their data, allowing us to see where the aid goes and how it's used. That's why under Section 3A, we have a monthly verification process to ensure accountability. What happens when we finally work towards achieving financial stability in Latin America? The European Council of Foreign Relations reports on October 8th that increasing developmental aid to developing countries significantly decreases the push factor of poverty so that immigration out of these countries decreases because people can actually have livelihoods in their own nations. That's why under Section 3B, efficacy is properly determined, ensuring that Latin America is safe enough for people to live their lives in peace instead of being forced to flee from their homes. We have the money, ingenuity, and power to solve the world's largest problems. Now all we have to do is put them in the right place. We may not have to worry about Antarctic immigrants, but if we don't take action soon, all of Latin America will be on thin ice.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes. Questioners, please rise. Senator Hassan Ali.
Hi, Senator. So by looking to past precedent, how has the US economy influenced these Latin American businesses?
Right, so the US economy, a lot of the time we facilitate trade with these businesses.
No, specifically, what has people in the US been doing to influence these businesses?
I'm not exactly understanding your question aside from just we work with these businesses.
So the private sector has already allocated billions of dollars. You proved to us that nothing has come out of that. How are we going to keep throwing money at them?
Senator Juneja.
Hi, Senator. So we've given like hundreds of billions of dollars of aid to Latin America before, right?
Yeah.
Have we ever seen immigration rates from our southern border decrease in any of those years?
You're right. It's definitely true, and that we're not going to completely solve the problem of immigration.
Sure, right? It's never decreased. This bill holds it to a 30% decrease standard to be renewed. Will your bill be renewed?
I argue at the very least, it's important to try. And even if that fails, we can then attempt to do other solutions.
Thank you. Senator Biram.
Hey, Senator, have we seen supplemental funding like this bill tries to do in the past?
Yes.
Okay, what was the result of that funding?
Right. At the very least, we continue to help decrease the poverty rate in Latin America.
Wait, what was the actual decrease in the poverty rate? Like, what did we actually see result from that tangibly?
Right. So it's kind of difficult to have an actual causal link, but at the very least, when you see that we concentrated our aid in Latin America, then the poverty rate fell in the past few years from 45
The answer
to...
is we didn't. That's why we are focused on this legislation today.
The poverty rate has decreased in the past...
Thank you. Senator Beck.
Hi, Senator. What does Section 3B of this legislation say?
It just says that we have it's an efficacy rate, essentially.
Okay, so if the migration rate doesn't decrease by 30%, we remove all supplemental funding, right? So if migration rates haven't decreased in the past, why are we punishing Latin American countries for our failure in policy?
Wait, hold on. We're not just going to take all of our aid out, even if immigration doesn't decrease, right? It's only the funding in this bill. Second, there's not exactly a date for which we set in which the efficacy has to be achieved.
Thank you. That is time. Both senators may be muted. Following that speech and sponsorship, negative speakers, please rise.
I'm sorry, Senator Lacqua. I'm going to need to step out. We had a fire alarm go off in my school. I'll be right back.
Not to worry. Could we just, the Peel would smile upon an indefinite recess until the parliamentarian returns. Senator Conda.
I move to call for an indefinite recess until the
Any seconds? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, so ordered. I think this would be a good time just to take splits on the next item to make sure that the same situation doesn't happen, and also hammer out a sponsor.
Wait, so for Bill 2, splits are looking like solid. Can we just get the sponsor issue nailed down? Like, can anyone change their app to a sponsor?
Parliamentarian, are you good to go?
Yes.
It was a 5-7, my bad.
So we will postpone that matter to a later time. The chair is just going to unilaterally end the recess, seeing as the parliamentarian has returned. Following that speech and sponsorship, all negative speakers, please rise. Senator Beck.
I thank the chair. This is Senator Beck, spelled B-A-E-K for my judges, not to be confused with Senator Jimmy Beck. This is my first time speaking in this legislative session. Just give me any indication if you are not ready, and I'll begin in a couple seconds. All right, it looks like we are all good. As a Congress, we are privileged. When we go to bed, we have a roof over our heads. When we wake up in the morning, we don't have to worry where our next meal is coming from. When we go out in the streets, we don't live in fear of whether we'll come back home alive. But for hundreds of thousands of civilians in Latin America and the Caribbean, this is not their reality. They are forced to live in constant fear of each waking morning, wondering if this is the day they'll have to flee. But under today's legislation, we ignore every nuance of the status quo in the region and abandon them to the wolves. Negate. I agree with Senator Ping. The best way to reduce migration rates in the long term is to invest in SMEs. However, she ignores one fundamental problem with this legislation that mandates your negative vote. It makes our aid to these SMEs conditional. Section 3B tells us that we will only renew our supplemental funding if migration from Latin American and Caribbean countries decreases by 30% in just 1 year. That means that SMEs have to decrease that migration rate within 365 days. Otherwise, they'll lose all additional funding that we give under this legislation. Let's look at the status quo step by step and understand why we are bound to cut funding after a year, because they simply don't have the capacity to do this within such a short time frame. Right now, the primary reason for migration is violent conflict in the region. The International Rescue Committee tells us last month that violence remains the main risk for the vast majority of Latin America, with homicide rates of up to 40.6 people per 100,000. The entire reason why violent crime is so rampant is because young people choose high-paying employment in areas like gangs rather than low-paying jobs in the formal business sector. Business Insider explains in September 2019 that low-quality employment for young people who prefer a high-paying life of informality on the streets versus a low-paying job in a formal sector has led to more crime. Employing these young people in businesses like SMEs is principally the most effective way to fight this, but that means we have to invest enough money for a long enough time so that they can actually grow their business and provide a financial incentive for young adults to become employed. However, 1 year of SME development simply isn't enough to achieve this, because as Barbara Peach of the William Davidson Institute explains in March 2020, SMEs grow in 5 stages across a typical life cycle of 5 years, from development to launch to survival, then finally to growth and expansion. But we only provide a year of supplemental funding, which means most businesses will only get to the stage where they're barely surviving. Without long-term financial support, small businesses remain entrenched in problems like low productivity and short life cycles. That means they can't effectively contribute to lowering the migration rate, in turn removing the funding we gave them in the first place. Now, why is that so uniquely harmful for civilians living in the region? It's because by abandoning these businesses, you also abandon entire families whose only hope to escape gang violence and crime is our aid. The JSTOR organization tells us in July 2018 that gangs emerge as a result of high unemployment, especially when many young people with criminal experience and no other employment opportunities are clustered together. That's why after the US government repatriated non-citizen gang members, gang activity grew in countries like El Salvador and Honduras. When we allow unemployment to continue to proliferate after an entire year of aid, we simultaneously exacerbate the migration crisis even more. UNICEF tells us in December 2020 that more than 432,000 families came to the US from Latin America in 2019, mainly fleeing from gang recruitment and even death threats from gangs like MS-13. Children are particularly affected. They not only have to flee from violence, but can't even go to school. When we make their survival and the very livelihoods of civilians contingent upon something they have no control over, that's where I draw the line. In no world can we stand by and watch as we send hundreds of thousands into danger. Don't let our privilege blind our policy and negate.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 1 second. Questioners, please rise. Senator Landsman.
Hi, Senator. So currently, who do SMEs benefit the most?
The civilians in the country.
Right, so specifically women, and women in Latin America are historically underserved and below the poverty line. So why wouldn't we invest in their livelihoods, the ones that I believe you champion?
Sorry, I think I was lagging a little there. Would you mind repeating that question?
Oh, yeah, of course. So historically, women benefit the most from SMEs. So why wouldn't we invest in their livelihoods when there's empirical evidence that they're successful?
Thank you, Senator Pang.
Hey, does Section 3B specify that all funding is going to be withdrawn if the 30% mark is not reached?
All supplemental funding under this legislation, yes.
Wait, hold on. All it says is that we submit our reports and then Congress just considers it. If we're making good progress towards that 30%, isn't that enough to renew aid?
It doesn't say that progress is enough to renew aid. It says that you have to have 30% reduction in migration rates in order to.
If efficacy is only determined by 30%,
Senator Kaiser.
Hey, does today's legislation exclusively fund SMEs?
No, but SMEs, as our sponsor proved to you, are principally the most effective.
Okay, sure. But your entire point was that they're going to be insufficient to change this in a year, right?
Correct.
Why can't we take other short-term action to make sure that change happens before we renew our aid?
Even if we do take other short-term action, none of that is going to be effective to reduce the migration rate by a whole 30%.
So hold on, you're saying there's nothing we can do as Congress to stop migrants from getting killed on the way through Central America in the next year?
Senator Liu.
Hi, Senator. So why are migrants leaving the region in the first place?
I told you that it's because of violent conflict.
Exactly. When our aid works to combat violence, do they have to flee the region?
I already told you that our aid doesn't work to combat violence when we're doing it in such a short term.
U.S. aid in the past has been wholly ineffective.
Sorry?
Has U.S. aid in the past been wholly ineffective?
I would argue so. We've barely decreased migration.
Wait,
rates
we've
at
seen no progress whatsoever because of U.S. aid.
all. A little
Thank
progress,
you.
but not
Both
as
senators
much
may be muted. Affirmative speakers, please rise. Senator Rubis.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. For my judges, Senator Rubis, R-U-B-A-S. Excited to be giving the second affirmation speech in this debate. Judges, there's a whole bunch of you, so I'm just going to give you guys a moment. Let me know if you're not ready, and otherwise I'll begin pretty soon. If everyone's good, I'll get started. Not too many people know this, but me and Senator Gloria Beck actually grew up together. In fact, in high school, we both worked summer jobs at the same local sandwich shop. Don't get me wrong, it was no Silicon Valley tech startup like I'm sure Senator Liu worked at, but it did teach me the impact that even a single small business can have on a local community. Sure, I'm still a little salty about Senator Gloria Beck beating me for Employee of the Month, but when we're trying to rebuild local communities from the ground up, businesses like this are exactly what we need. It's because this bill rebuilds Latin America, one coffee shop at a time. I'm proud to pass this bill. Senators Juneja and Hassan Ali ask in cross-examination if our aid has been effective. But honestly, I think our aid's been pretty awesome. Take a look at this. A USAID report on the results of the last 60 years of aid found that USAID assistance has helped infant mortality fall faster in Latin America than anywhere else in the world, declining by 70% since 1960. Senator Hassan Ali, we're spending less than 1% of our government budget on aid. If these are the results we've been able to achieve, clearly we're doing something right. But Senator Gloria Beck is worried that this bill doesn't reduce immigration enough. But the reason we haven't reduced immigration in the past is because we only just started focusing on that objective. USAID writes in January of 2022 that they just started a new initiative to start focusing on addressing the root causes of immigration. That's why this bill will reduce immigration more than historical precedent shows. But you know what? I hear the negation's concerns. USAID is great, but it's not perfect. And the challenges Latin America faces today will be even harder to overcome. But that's what makes this bill so beautiful. We're not just giving more aid, we're making that aid better. My side has been way too general about the kind of aid this bill gives. It's time to get really specific about the provisions of this bill. First, pass this bill to aid small businesses. Section 2 of this bill specifies that at least 40% of aid must be sent to small and medium-sized businesses. That's because one of the biggest deficits in current USAID spending is a lack of small business aid. Here's the quantification we've been missing. Harvard Business Review writes in August of 2016 that aid to small businesses makes up less than 1% of US aid. But by increasing aid to these businesses, more money goes towards actually helping the people. Senator Gloria Beck says that small business aid is ineffective. But not only did Senator Peng already prove the opposite, but even further, a 2021 study by the Legitim Institute aggregating data between the World Bank and UN found that aid targeted at small businesses was the single most effective at increasing general country prosperity. Yes! Small businesses run by moms, dads, and families are without a doubt the heart of economies. They're the essence of who deserves our dollars most. And this kind of economic growth helps communities grow too, by creating jobs that keep people off the street. Senator Gloria Beck, you say violence is the biggest reason for immigration. Listen closely here. A study by the University of Delaware in March of 2016 found that every 1% increase in small business growth led to a 1.3% reduction in gang violence. That's the gang violence that's forcing people to immigrate. By creating small businesses and rebuilding communities, we help that with this bill. But second, this bill also increases the accountability of our aid, because Section 3A creates monthly audits of where our aid is going, and Section 4 creates a report straight to Congress about what our aid is doing. And this stuff is empirically proven to improve the effectiveness of our aid. UChicago writes in October of 2018 that aid audits reduce corruption by 8% and increase crackdown by 20%. That's why the aid in this bill is going to be more effective than any of our aid in the past, because we're not just giving more aid, we're actually improving it. I'll be honest, guys. Senator Gloria Beck deserved Employee of the Month. She makes a seriously good panini. But these kind of experiences that make growing up special shouldn't be exclusive to Americans. I believe in the principle that all people were created equal. So today, it's time to give the people of Latin America another chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes, 55 seconds. Questioners, please rise. First, Senator Quesada.
Thank you. Senator, why does the US government run USAID?
I mean, there's a variety of reasons. It's to help other countries. Sometimes it is also for our own interests, but.
Sometimes. No, I would argue that the whole reason it exists is for US foreign interests. Historically, we've seen that the US is not really a philanthropist country.
I mean, I would argue if we're reducing child mortality by 7%, that kind of philanthropy is having positive impacts on other countries.
Well, actually, those statistics are twisted by USA to make it look like they're beneficial when really they're just supporting imperialist policies. So I disagree.
Thank you, Senator Hassan Ali.
Good morning, Senator. I want to talk about your infant mortality statistic. Can you point me to exactly where in today's legislation it talks about investing in the healthcare of these countries?
So the great thing is we've already spent a lot of time investing in that, and we have infrastructure. So it's time that we're moving on to the next part of building up communities in Latin America, and that's what this bill focuses on.
I see, but if today's legislation is far too vague, other than talking about investing in small businesses, how do we guarantee that this funding is not going to be used for other purposes?
Well, I'd argue the malleability is a strength because we have a report to keep USA.
Both senators may be muted. Negative speakers, please rise. Senator Biram.
Hello, everyone. That's Senator Biram, spelled B-E-E-R-A-M. My Wi-Fi connection has been a little bit spotty. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you so much. There are a lot of people, so I'll give everyone a second. In the meantime, before I get started, I just want to issue some brief thank yous to my coach, to my team, to my family, and my friends. I wouldn't be here without you. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much. Is everyone ready? Awesome. I'll get started. In 1913, after President William Taft defined dollar diplomacy as the foreign policy blueprint of America, we as a country were forced to reconcile between the stark duality of the monetary incentive and diplomatic interest. In the 20th century, we've come to a similar crossroads in policy. As Latin America grapples with the reality of its economy, it is the responsibility of this Congress to legislate with an equally realistic paradigm. Take this realism, strike down this policy. Firstly, I want to fundamentally recontextualize this debate from the unique perspective of time frame. I would argue that every single benefit the affirmation has told you is uniquely short term. My issue with this legislation is that it dooms Latin America in the long term. In fact, the principal reason I am failing this legislation is because it punishes Latin America for receiving funding. Now, Senator Ping and Senator Rubis tell you some very salient benefits. Now, I want to do what Senator Gloria didn't and take the affirmation at their highest ground, because I actually agree those impacts do in fact come to fruition. However, all of these affirmative impacts are contingent on America providing this funding into perpetuity. The moment we pull out funds, whenever the political zeitgeist shifts, we will see these countries crash. What is the reasoning for that? Because of structural dependency on America for both economic growth and human capital development. In fact, Al Jazeera explained in February of 2018 that we've already seen evidence of this. Across Africa, we have launched comparable funding programs into these small businesses that Senator Rubis tells you. What was the result? They hurt economic development in the long term. Why? Because they prevent the country from growing and developing organically, i.e., businesses are not responsible for their own financial status when they're relying on America. What does this mean? Every affirmative impact that the affirmation has championed is unsustainable insofar as funding will eventually expire. This is the same situation that happened in Afghanistan as well. That is the world that the affirmation defends. But what is the net harm of passing? It is because you suppress Latin American economies. I want to provide a nuance this entire round has glossed over by asking the million-dollar question it seems everyone has missed. Why are these economies as bad as they are? Alexander Main explains, on March 25th of 2020 for the Center for Economic Policy Research that we are responsible for how severely stunted the Latin American economy is because of our past financial institutions and our past aid programs. This precedent is the nail in the coffin for the affirmation. To be honest, it is a bit ironic because this bill is a self-defeating prophecy. We are trying to fix the problem that we caused with a solution that put them in this position in the first place. Under this legislation, we chain these countries to the shackles of economic ruin for people in Latin America. Their lives go unseen, unheard, forgotten, and left behind by this Congress. Finally, let's do some simple weighing, because every single warrant that the affirmation has and will continue to give you about economic benefit only increases the probabilistic likelihood of seeing this dependency actually happen. Use this analysis against them. Senator Peng and Senator Rubis, you just assume that short-term gains are a prerequisite for long-term prosperity. That is a false dichotomy. Precedence has shown that that is just not true. For the past few decades, Latin America has been trapped under a fragmented political landscape, trapped under the tyranny of gangs and corruption, trapped by the apathy of this Congress. Do not doom them with an affirmation vote. Strike this bill down.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes, 55 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Senator Conda.
Do you need a starting investment or starting capital to start a business?
Sure.
Okay, so does this legislation provide starting capital?
No, I think that's a massive misconception. What we do is we provide supplementary funding that is very, very asymmetrically different from things like microloans.
The supplementary funding mentioned in section 1 is supplemental in relations to like our budget. It's not supplementary to the businesses.
The correct solution is microloans. The problem being, in the status quo, if you implement this, it is not an organic development. We are development.
Before we proceed, it does appear that someone has dropped out of the call. Judge Nagahawate, are you back with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Senator Huda.
Hi, Senator. How long have we given aid to Latin America for?
Decades, like at least for the past 40 years, including like pre-Cold War era.
Yeah, and so over that time frame, have we seen an increase in Latin America's economy or a sharp decrease?
We've seen a decrease. I literally read you evidence of the reason they are in this situation in the first place is because of our predatory loans that they
okay, so
aren't
let's
able to
go in a shorter time frame. Over the last 10 years, has Latin America's economy gone up or down?
I mean, generally down. That's why they need these loans in the first place.
That's not true, though. In like this,
thank you. Both senators may be muted. Affirmative speakers, please rise. Senator Landsman.
I thank the chair. Hi, that's Senator Landsman speaking for the first time this legislative session for the affirmation. I'm so excited to be here and so proud to be speaking on the affirmation today. All right, assuming everyone is ready, though I know there are a lot of judges, I will begin in just a moment to give you just a couple seconds if needed. Okay. Assuming everyone is ready, we'll begin momentarily. While the term feminist may be fairly new, the idea that women must resist their environment is a historic battle. In Latin America, gender has remained a key element in life since the pre-colonial era. From the destruction of complementarity to its revival in the 20th century, the upward struggle has existed, and with this legislation, we have the chance to ease its burden. It seems that this legislative body has once again run into a problem it is frequently afflicted with. I like to call it CBI, or complexity-based inaction. Senator Rubis is right, it's time to get specific. Let me be the first to direct us with a simple objective. How does this bill benefit Latin America the most? The answer lies in the way that the legislation affects women. We've debated the implication of policies for women across the world, and I'd hope that more of you would focus on it now. I understand that everyone has their crosses to bear, or in my case, their stars of David, but now I choose this as mine. I feel that this Congress often takes on more than it can reasonably bear, but today is surprisingly an exception. The round so far has been split up and dissected by points regarding aid, such as those championed by Senator Peng, and those regarding insolvency from Senator Gloria Beck. However, look to Section 2 of the bill before us and recognize that the most important impact is found in the mandated 40% of infrastructure funding SMEs. Defined as a business that maintains revenues, assets, or a number of employees below a certain threshold, these SMEs specifically function as a panacea idea for women below the poverty line in Latin America. The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean in 2021 reports that as a result of the steep economic recession, it is estimated that the poverty rate affected 33.7% of the population. This means that the total number of those below the poverty line rose to 209 million by the end of 2020, affecting 22 million more people than in the previous year. Of that total, 78 million people found themselves living in abject poverty. The World Bank Group in April of 2021 clarifies that while there has been a rise in self-employment for women as a response to increasing poverty, the Global Dialogue in 2018 tells us that the rate of female poverty in Latin America increased from 114 to 127 for every 100 men. Senator Gloria Beck, you argue that the prevalence of violence will outweigh the benefits brought by this legislation, and Senator Biram, you assert that this legislation fosters dependency on the United States, but I would assert the opposite, and here's why. The SME Finance Forum in 2017 states that approximately 65% of women-led small and medium enterprises in developing countries are underserved. The World Bank then furthers that female entrepreneurs make significant contributions to growth and poverty reduction worldwide, but face greater obstacles than their male counterparts. The Gates Foundation in February of 2021 continues to substantiate that female-led SMEs yield economic empowerment and make significant contributions to GDP and employment. To the negation, here's the solvency. When we directly fund these enterprises, not only do we see an increase in GDP for countries like Latin America, but more importantly, we help the most marginalized communities, Latin American and Caribbean women. I pose this question: why would we sacrifice women's rights on the basis of a fear for insolvency? Senators, a Congress frozen in inaction is worse than no Congress at all. Our priority needs to be protecting the growth of SMEs, and this legislation does just that. Considering that these enterprises are specifically aimed at providing aid for demographics underneath an outlined threshold, this legislation becomes a propitious catalyst for change. Senators Gloria Beck and Biram, I appreciate and understand your concerns about immigration, but recognize that the basic principles of aid render it unimportant and irrelevant to the scope of today's debate. When we expand job production under SMEs and directly benefit economies through proper regulation and oversight, efficacy verification becomes unnecessary and simply another method of damage control. I don't understand why we as a Congress tend to make broad generalizations about those who are suffering. If I have accomplished anything in the past 4 minutes, I hope I've directed our focus. Justice in government, and quite frankly, the moral compass I hope this Congress has. My primary responsibility is to the women I represent, but injustice is universal in the status quo, and I sincerely hope you vote in affirmation. I thank the chair.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 10 seconds. Questioners, please rise. And I'll go first to Senator Juneja.
Hi, Senator.
Hi, Senator. So will aid be renewed in 5 months?
Well, that ultimately depends, obviously, based on the bill. But what I'm arguing
Right.
is that this incentive for SMEs
Is
to
it
work
even
and employ
feasibly-
women means that it doesn't matter.
Sure. Is it feasibly possible to decrease the immigration rates to the flow of our southern border by 30%?
Yes, I'd argue absolutely. And while it may
Have
be
we
more of a
ever seen
long-term
even a
solution,
1%
this is a
decrease in
catalyst.
migrants to our southern border?
Could you repeat your question?
Have we ever seen even a 1% decrease
Just
in
as
migrants?
Senator Rubas told you, we are only beginning to direct our focus.
Senator Biram.
I'm not understanding.
Hey, Senator, so let's do some probability weighing, right? What is more probable, that they can decrease their immigration rates by this much, or that they will lose their funding in this time period allotted?
Senator Biram, I would argue that even if they lose funding, funding them in the first place is more important to beginning growth. SMEs that employ women will continue to flourish because I've provided empiric evidence that women-led enterprises are more successful.
So did I.
When we
How do those
begin
weigh
that
against each other?
employment, it's an upward trend.
But I also gave you multiple empirics. How do those weigh against each other?
Empirics about what? SMEs are proven to be
Thank you.
effective.
Both senators may be muted.
Long-term harm.
Negative speakers, please rise. Senator Hassan Ali.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. That is Senator Hassan Ali. This will be my first time speaking in this legislative session on the negation. There are a lot of judges, so if anybody is not ready, feel free to let me know. And Mr. President, can you hear me and see me all right?
Perfectly clear.
Awesome. As politicians living in the most hostile political climate in modern American history, I will be the first person to admit that there has never been a higher demand for calculated and reasonable compromise. But even now, There are issues that should be bipartisan because they are nonpartisan, because they shouldn't even be up for debate. And that is the issue we have before us. Now, I want to start by looking to past precedent and what's actually going on in the status quo. It's no secret that US corporations and private companies have invested in Latin American companies for the sole purpose of exploiting their cheap labor. Now, what does this bill do to change that? It changes the money from private corporations to the US government. I actually think one of the most important contentions thus far has come from Senator Landsman on the impact of women. Here's the thing, Senator. The money that has already been invested has in no way improved the lives of these people. In fact, it has worsened it. Senator Pang and Bierman in the sponsorship provided us with a multitude of statistics and told us that food insecurity affects almost half of the population. One response: the private sector has been giving money to these enterprises. Senator Pang's evidence proves that none of it has been effective. So let me quantify. According to Statista's research department, in 2020, US investments made in Central and South America were approximately 253 billion US dollars. But even if you think that that private sector funding hasn't been influential, look to Senator Juneja in questioning, who provides you with supplemental evidence that we've already provided federal aid and migration rates haven't even decreased. The primary intent of this bill is to decrease the amount of immigrants that come to our border. But senators, when you get to go home with your paychecks written by K Street and Wall Street, you don't see the impacts on the actual people of Latin America. You don't see how this investment has caused their wages to drop significantly and their ability to provide for their family as well.
Senator Hassanali, please pause. Apologies, however, we have lost a judge, and I would hate for that to have to interfere with your ranks. I have paused the time at 2 minutes and 20 seconds elapsed. We will wait for Judge Nagawate to rejoin.
No worries, thank you.
Judge
Sorry,
Nagawate, everything okay? It appears Judge Nagawate is experiencing some technical difficulties, so we will give them some time to sort that out.
Could I go reset my Wi-Fi router? Sorry, I'm having a lot of connectivity issues.
Yes. Would someone smile on calling? Yes, Senator Huda.
We have an indefinite recess until Judge Nagawate comes back.
Any seconds? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, so ordered.
Okay, do you want to get back to the discussion we were having in the last recess about sponsorships for Bill 2?
Real quick, I don't think we ever got a formal split on the rest of this bill. Should we just double check?
Yeah, let's do that first. Yeah.
Only raise if you haven't spoken yet. Aft speakers raise a placard. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Judge Nagawate has returned. Judge Nagawate, are you able to hear us again? Perfect. If I could just get confirmation that Judge Peterson Long and Judge Foster and Judge Ivey and Judge Natarajan are here, that would be great. Perfect.
Yeah, I'm here.
Natarajan is here. Excellent. Senator Hassanali, you are at 2 minutes and 20 seconds elapsed in your speech. You may continue.
For the judge's reference, do you want me to start from the beginning or should I just continue off?
I'm good, but it depends on the judge who wasn't in the round. So it's totally up to his discretion.
Why don't you start from the top? I don't want to unfairly rank you for anything.
Yeah, for sure. No worries. So once again, Senator Hassanali on the negation. PO, we good to go? Okay. As politicians living in the most hostile political climate in modern American history, I will be the first person to admit that there has never been a higher demand for calculated and reasonable compromise. But even now, there are issues that should be bipartisan because they are nonpartisan. because they shouldn't even be up for debate. And that is the issue we have before us. Now, I want to start by looking at past precedent and examining what's actually going on in the status quo. Now, it's no secret that US corporations and private companies have invested in Latin America for the purpose of exploiting their cheap labor. What does this bill do differently? It changes the funding from private companies to the US government. Now, I think one of the most important contentions thus far has come from Senator Landsman on the impact of women. Here's the thing, the money that has already been invested has in no way improved the lives of these people. The fact of the matter is it has actually worsened it. Senator Pang in her affirmative said that a multitude of statistics, including how food insecurity affects almost half of the population. One response, the private sector has already been giving money to these enterprises. Her evidence proves that none of it has been effective. So let me quantify further. According to Statista's research department, in 2020, US investments made in Central and South America were almost $253 billion. But even if you think that that private sector money hasn't been influential, look to Senator Juneja in questioning, who provides supplemental evidence that we've already provided federal aid, and yet migration rates haven't decreased. The primary intent of this bill is to decrease the amount of immigrants that come to our border. But senators, when you get to go home with your paychecks written by K Street and Wall Street, you don't see the impacts on the people of Latin America. You don't see how this investment has caused their wages to drop significantly. Senator Landsman posed the question in her speech of why we would sacrifice acting on women's rights for fear of insolvent policy. Here you go, Senator. This bill only throws money at the system and hopes to fix decades of struggle. But we also need to talk specifically about Section 3, because if the way we're determining success of this bill comes through a decrease in migration, we are ignorant to the plethora of factors that contribute to the decision to immigrate. I refuse to boil these factors down to a lack of US investment in their businesses, especially considering that we've already invested billions, and we have never seen a decrease in migration. As Northwestern University explains, that some of the factors include access to better healthcare and quality education, as well as large existing amounts of family reunification and the pursuit of the American dream. Senator Rubas told you about decreasing infant mortality. I would remind you, Senator, that Section 2 outlines small businesses. Other than that, this bill is far too vague to outline where else funding is going. And no, Senator Rubas, when it comes to foreign policy with already vulnerable populations, ambiguity in legislation is not a good thing. In fact, with all due respect, the idea that we can solve these problems in Latin America by just throwing more money is not only ignorant of past precedent, it perpetuates a mentality of colonialism. The integrity of our borders is not a partisan issue. The integrity is not an issue that is even upon debatable, and the integrity is challenged by this legislation. Negate.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes. 10 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Senator Rubas.
So if we've seen success with our funds before, and this bill allows USA to invest the remaining 60%, the non-small business money, in what they think is most effective, why isn't the previous success evidence of future success?
So I actually entirely disagree with that first part. US aid has not always been effective. In fact, as both myself and Mr. Biron proved, this aid has actually been detrimental to the wages of these workers.
For example, though, I told you we reduced infant mortality by 70% in the past. Is that not evidence of historical success?
Thank you, Senator Landsman.
Hi. Senator, I really appreciate your advocacy. I just have a couple questions. So first, considering that funding SMEs is an extremely recent development, why is that 40% akin to throwing money at a problem when the problem doesn't even exist in the status quo?
So as I told you in my speech, the private sector of the US has already invested into these small and medium enterprises.
And why is federal oversight subsequently such a bad thing?
because when we look to past precedent and how funding has already been given, I proved to you that it was not effective.
Thank
I
you.
refuse to.
Time, both senators may be muted.
I thank the chair.
The chair thanks you. Affirmative speakers, please rise. Senator Kaiser.
Thank the chair. To my judges, that's Senator Kaiser or Jethwani Kaiser, Kuyser to keep things short. Just get a smile or a nod and I'll get started soon. Amazing. Barring any objections, right? Cool. We call America a nation of immigrants. As the representative of New York, the immigration capital of the world, I find that epithet particularly fitting. My own grandfather immigrated from India in the 1950s, becoming a civil engineer in my home city, and my father, a few decades later, as a refugee from the Soviet Union. If there's one thing I've learned from my family story and my time as a congressman, it's that migrants should be honored, not ignored. We say we pride ourselves on our history, so it is the height of hypocrisy that we've done so little to help migrants at our southern border. That ends now. The side that wins today's round is the side that best supports Latin America. Now, we've heard a lot of reasons why this bill doesn't accomplish our goal. Senator Gloria tells you that we can't make our aid conditional and can't possibly reduce migration by 30% in a year. And Senator Biram adds that Latin America is going to become dependent on us in the long term. But here's the thing. We need to expand the scope of this bill beyond solely funding SMEs. Because Senator Hassan Ali, nowhere does it say we're only giving money to governments and businesses. That's why this policy is different from the past precedent you cited. To start off, let's follow the trajectory of the bill the same way we would follow a migrant's journey from the beginning. To truly achieve this bill's goal of reducing migration across the Mexican-American border, we must start at the root cause of the migration issue. Now, like Senator Pang explained, Latin American economies are so devastated by COVID that unemployment is at an all-time high, and helping small businesses would offset that. Let's take things a step further. Less employment means poverty spikes, and poverty spikes means danger. The MSF furthers on February 11th of 2020 that 62% of Central American respondents said that they were exposed to violence during the 2 years prior to leaving their home country. Senator Rubas already proved long-term sustainability for Latin America when we pass, and Senator Gloria actually conceded this. So to finally clear up her and Senator Hassan Ali's concerns about solvency, let's talk about violence in the short term, because that's where the biggest impact of this bill lies. Even ignoring the entire impact of supporting SMEs, you still pass solely on the grounds that this allows us to fund programs to support migrants and combat violence in Latin America. I'd argue that alone is enough to reduce migrations by 30% in a year. Because here's the thing, Section 2 allocates 40% to SME development, but the other 60% isn't earmarked. That gives USAID control over where the funding goes, whether directly to governments, NGOs, or our own programs. So Senator Gloria and Senator Biram, SMEs might not change migration patterns in a year, but I'd argue stopping violence along the way could. Zach Worley from the US Global Leadership Coalition quantifies on May 30th of 2019 that as part of El Salvador's national security plan, USAID security programs contributed to a 45% decline in homicides from 2015 to 2017. And that's with a fraction of this funding. By passing this bill, we're giving USAID hundreds of millions of dollars to fund programs like these and save lives. I established that fears about safety are one of the biggest push factors for people migrating to the US. If we take direct action to reduce that, even disregarding Senator Rubas's point about small businesses, migration will decrease. Senator Biram, you're worried about dependency. I'd argue that helping migrants stay safely in their countries and contribute to their economies ensures the same sustainability you're worried about. And through this all, we've forgotten the most important thing. Because while we wait for Latin America to become sustainable, we help migrants trapped at the border. Julian Aguilar reports for the Texas Tribune on December 11th of 2019 that while some shelters in the border city of Juarez do have police officers providing security, it's still not enough for every shelter. There were over 636 instances of crimes committed against migrants that year. And when we pass this bill, we're giving USAID the capacity to end atrocities like this the minute we step off the chamber floor. That's what this bill does. That's what it will continue to do. And that's what we need it to do. Pass.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 6 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Senator Beck.
Hi, Senator.
Hey.
So Senator Landsman on your own side told us that SME funding has been relatively recent, but then Senator Janeja tells us in questioning that migration rates haven't decreased in the past. So regardless
Okay,
of what
hold on.
question,
I'm telling
regardless of
you,
what kind of aid we provide, how can we ensure that we decrease migration rates by
can I answer your question, please? I'm telling you that even if we don't fund SMEs at all, solely by decreasing violence along the way through USAID programs that already exist, we
But
could
we've
do the
already
same.
proved to you that that hasn't decreased migration rates.
Nobody's talked about these alternative programs at all. I don't know who would have
Thank
proven
you,
it to me.
Senator Conda.
Hey,
Hello,
Senator.
Representative. So let's say we decrease violence on the migratory paths by using
Sure.
USAID.
Okay. Yeah.
Wouldn't that make migration a more lucrative option because it's now less dangerous?
Okay, it's not about decreasing violence on a migratory path. It's decreasing violence in countries where people are fleeing because of violence, right? If we're making people's homes less safe, they're not just going to migrate to the US, right? These people have
fighting
homes, they have
gang
families.
violence takes more than 5 months. Securing a pathway is easy, sure, but just
Are you
fighting
telling
gangs
me
takes
that
longer, right?
stopping
Thank you.
violence
That
is
is
going to make
time.
people leave?
Both senators may be muted. Negative speakers, please rise. Senator Quesada.
Thank you again. That is Senator Quesada. Quesada. Sounds like quesadilla. That's how you can remember it. Seeing as this is the final round of TOC and it will be seen by thousands, I need to give a short but critical message before my speech. We must acknowledge that this year, only 5% of students in congressional debate at the TOC were Latino, and these numbers were similarly abysmal for Black students and remain low in other formats like PF. I now sit here as someone who by chance became the only Latino congressperson in this finals round, and it's simply unacceptable in the 21st century. As an activity that prides itself on being a platform for discussions, we don't hear Black and Latino stories because we aren't represented. And that's because of systemic racism across all levels of the activity and in education. We need to make sure that we provide ways for Black and Latino students to access debate resources and coaching. And we as competitors and judges must recognize our privileges and do our best to make this activity inclusive. Too many Black and Latino people have quit because of racism on Discord servers or secretive group chats, and it must come to an end. As we continue this finals round, keep in mind your own biases, and let's work together to make debate an activity for all, not for some. 5% cannot be the norm. With that being said, I'll start my speech on my first word, assuming all judges are ready. In morning hour, I mentioned that because TOC is 5% Latino, it's highly likely that there will be no Latinos to speak on Latin America in finals. Well, I guess I was wrong because I broke the ceiling. Senator Bake mentions Honduras in her speech, and tons of senators have talked about the people of Latin America. But guess what? I don't just see them as other people because I am Honduran. I am the son of the immigrants senators are mentioning. And I noticed that every senator on both the AF and NEG, such as Senator Rubis and Hassan Ali, have only explained to you that my home country is full of crime without telling you why that's the case. Honduras didn't magically become poor. And that's the importance of diverse perspectives in debate. Let me spend the next minutes explaining. Fail this bill because it lets the US control Latin American voters. Senator Biram does a discussion on dollar diplomacy, but doesn't go into detail about how it materializes. So let's start with election tampering. Section 1 specifies that funding will go to USA, which as an agency is as honest as a murderer wearing an I love to help people sign. Senators Peng and Kaiser try to come up with fairy tales of how America the philanthropist is going to save us Latinos. What she and the other AF senators don't consider are incentives. No one has asked themselves, why does USAID exist? The Haiti Action Network in 2016 calls USAID the friendly face of imperialism because it's used to disguise capitalist practices under a face of kindness. Jacobin magazine in 2017 reveals that even top USAID officials like Andrew Batsos admits that USAID's mission has nothing to do with development, but rather political intervention on behalf of US interests. Take the example of Haiti, where USAID has selectively chosen to distribute resources in politically neutral areas to undermine existing community programs and attempt to delegitimize the demands of left-wing Congress people. By having temporary aid from a very capitalist nation, many desperate and poor Haitian voters associate the nation with helpfulness, like a carrot on a stick. In addition, many camps were strategically placed in town centers so that people could not protest their actions as it was taken up. These actions over time have helped the US turn many voters to the right without having to intervene militarily. Take dictator Pinochet of Chile, who murdered LGBT people and was supported by US foreign aid tampering. The Haiti Action Network source is also very good because it explains that USAID picks and chooses numbers, like the one Senator Rubis tried to use, to make it look like they're doing good. He says infant mortality dropped, but doesn't explain how other variables like crime are still on the rise. Passing this bill means expanding programs that only serve US interests. Senators Rubis and Kaiser try to tell you that we need to tackle the root cause, but poverty and crime is the stem, not the root. The root is US intervention that caused all this in the first place. And I'm the first senator who's mentioned that at all, probably because of my background. Second, fail to prevent US multinational takeover. Since European empires first found important resources in the Americas, plundered and colonized our lands, the history of the region's countries has been the theft of our natural wealth. That is why in Latin America, multinational companies are like termites that come in and steal all of the resources without getting back. This bill's open a can of worms. Section 2 specifies 40% of funds must go to SMEs, and Henry Voltmeyer of St. Mary's University, Halifax explains that due to US capitalists' twisted motives, US-based companies exploit these laws to establish themselves in LATAM. So how do large multinationals bypass the limits of SME laws? Companies promote smaller SMEs as suppliers or contractors, which is a loophole to get around the employment and size restrictions by saying that it's not really part of the company. A 2016 report by Latin American researcher Thomas Skidmore finds that one of the reasons for devastation in Honduras is US multinationals. Companies like Dole and Chiquita come into our nation and destroy our indigenous lands, take farmlands and deforest, and most of the benefits don't even go to regular citizens, just oligarchs. The few jobs that are provided provide starving wages and horrific working conditions, including companies that have murdered feminist activists like Berta Cáceres to stop her from exposing their actions. So when Senator Landsman tries to tell you that US imperialism will help women, I frankly feel offended because any of my family members in Honduras will tell you US aid has only elevated the fear they feel. Passing this bill targets me, my family members in Honduras, and tells us our voices don't matter, only those of white men in Washington. So fail it.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 8 seconds. Questioners, please rise. Senator Kaiser.
Hey, I just want to start things off by saying thank you sincerely for talking about Black and brown representation in debate. I think that's really important. To get a little bit more topical, who controls what USAID funds?
The US government.
Right. So like historically, the USAID has done some horrible things because the government has done horrible things, right? But why can't we just tell the agency not to participate in these programs that exploit people?
Well, I'd argue that's very difficult to do, again, because of incentives, right? What Congress passes, most of that policy will be done by
Are you saying we have an incentive not to help people?
Hey, so I completely agree. US aid is fundamentally flawed, and I thank you for pointing that out in this round. However, it's pretty clear that we as Congress have the power to reform US aid. Therefore, it's not better for us to actually address and make proper change within US aid than just failing this legislation and having no alternative.
Well, no, because I think my whole argument, I guess from my Honduran perspective, is that the US shouldn't be given aid. Like, let these countries operate on their own and create peaceful relations, but you don't need to provide all of this aid.
Thank you. That is time. Both senators may be muted. And seeing as that was the conclusion of the 8th speech in this final round, it has been my honor to preside over the beginning of this session. Once again, that is Senator Ilacqua, spelled ILACQUA. I wish all of you best of luck, and I will hand off the virtual gavel, or in this case, time placards, to Senator Wu.
Thank you, President Ilacqua. Hi, everyone. First of all, before I get started with anything, big congratulations to every debater for making it to this round. I know that it's like one of the biggest honors in the entire season to get to this place. So I just really want to be as supportive as possible over the next 8 speeches for all of you. So I'm going to quickly go over some procedural things before we jump back into debate. I'm not going to do anything too different from President Ilacqua. So right now we have sort of an order established recency wise, but for those who haven't spoken yet, it'll still be random. And then once an order has been established on that second piece of legislation, for which I'll be POing the first 5 speeches, then we'll be going off of recency. Same for questions. There has been a recency established, so I'll be going off of that. For timing, since we have 4-minute speeches, I want to try to give the debaters as many signals as possible because they're longer than usual. So I'll give you a signal at 1 minute, at 2 minutes, at 3 minutes, at 3:30, and at 3:55. I know that's like more than usual, but if you need me to give any other sort of variations of your signaling, just let me know in the chat or something. I can also do that. But other than that, 10-second grace period. I will have to cut you off right at 4:10 as to protect you from the 1-point penalty that the TOC wants judges to assess on debaters who go over that grace period. For 30-second questioning blocks, I'll count down from 20 seconds down to 30 seconds. So once that 30-second block ends, we'll either proceed directly to the next questioner or we'll end the entire block depending on the situation. I won't recognize questioners in the chat. I'll recognize them as the block progresses, as to allow for you to raise your placard as you see fit during the actual block in case you think of a question, but you didn't originally have your placard raised. Other than that, motions and points of personal privilege should be made in between speeches. So between a questioning block and the next speech. In the chat, I'll try to recognize those as expediently as possible. But other than that, I think everything else should be relatively standard. I'm going to send out a link to this spreadsheet in case, 1 second. So once you get this link, I have updated it with everything in the first 33.3% of this round. Just let me know if everything seems pretty accurate to you guys, if you see your name, and if there are any mistakes that jump out to you, let me know before we get back into debate. And then once I see some thumbs, we'll get back into it. Okay, cool. So with that, we left off on a speech in the negation. So with that, any and all affirmative speakers, please rise. Senator Huda.
I thank the chair for the chamber's reference that is Senator Almiron Huda speaking for the first time in this legislative cycle. Now I'll just give everyone a few seconds to be ready. If you're not, a verbal indication would be amazing. Otherwise, I'll begin shortly. In 2016, the world witnessed Brazil's brand new Olympic stadiums, juxtaposed side by side with the rundown favelas and slums that comprise the majority of their country. These images are a scene all too common across Latin America. And it was in 2016 when the global community should have immediately lent a hand to the people trapped in these conditions. I am not willing to pass up on the opportunity given to us today. Right now, there's not enough infrastructure development in Latin America. Now, Senator Juneja, during cross-examination, argues that we already provide aid to Latin America. Here's the problem with that argument. It's not enough. The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean in May 2017 explains that to meet their infrastructure needs, Latin America needs to invest 300% more than they're investing right now. Because Eric Parado at the Inter-American Development Bank in May 2019 explains their infrastructure quality ranked second to last out of 6 global regions. That's because Latin American countries lack the resources and the framework to execute complex infrastructure projects. That changes today, because in today's legislation, we tackle the issues head on. We increase funding by 400 million, and we verify the goals of this legislation before issuing more aid. But then the advocacy of the affirmation championed by Senator Gloria Beck and Hassan Ali, which no other of affirmation senators argue, is that migration rates haven't been going down. It's time we understand. Migration has already been decreasing. The Pew Research Center quantifies on January 25th, 2019, that from 2010 to 2017, migration from Latin America and Caribbean countries year over year already decreased from 44% to 7%. The decrease in migration isn't as severe as the negation tells us, and that's not even where our aid is targeting. I'm willing to take a chance on $400 million if it means that the people of Latin America can receive the help they need. That's because the aid radically improves people's lives. Now, Senator Hassan Ali argues that this bill doesn't outline funding sources. I'll tell you where it'll go. Latin America's biggest issue, that's infrastructure. Because bad infrastructure isn't just shaky bridges and bumpy roads. The Inter-American Development Bank details the true consequences. Damaged roads don't just mean that every car ride feels like a mini roller coaster. It means that there's more car breakdowns and a greater risk of accidents. And a lack of internet in Latin America doesn't just mean that you can't watch the new episode of Euphoria. It means you can't connect with the world. Senator Quesada, these investments aren't just for the rich. Inter-American Development Bank concludes that with necessary infrastructure investments, the poorest 40% of households would receive an 11% increase in living standards. But then Senator Biram then comes up here and tells us that with aid, Latin America's economy has been going down. Senator Rubis already told you that small businesses get a boost. Let's extend that argument, because as OECD explains in February 2017, that over the course of the last decade, Latin America has achieved economic expansion and made significant progress in poverty reduction. Today's legislation now puts this on a larger scale. But furthermore, it combats gang violence. Senator Gloria Beck argued that gang violence has been increasing, but didn't tell you why that happened. Now, Senator Kaiser already proved to you that gang violence goes down. Let's extend that argument even further. The Neil Piper Coventry University in August 22nd, 2016 showed that poverty is linked to gang violence because families who can barely turn on a light bulb during the nighttime or a heater during the winter are often pushed to desperation to joining a gang. For so long, we fought violence with bullets and bombs, tearing apart the communities that were already broken. Today, we fix that because the American Journal of Epidemiology showed in April 2012, when Medellin, Colombia started infrastructure investment programs, homicides dropped 84%. Today, we save the lives of Latin Americans. The infrastructure we build with investment is as much physical as it is symbolic because we create new paths and lives for so many people. That's why we affirm.
Thank you for that speech of 4 minutes and 9 seconds. We're now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Any and all questioners, please rise. Senator Quesada.
Thank you. Good speech, Senator. When USAID executives like Bastios have admitted that the whole point of USAID is to promote US interests abroad, how can you guarantee that this time around it'll actually be meant to help?
So I argue there's a trade-off when it comes to aid. We've all agreed that when it comes to US aid, there's always a little bit of political influence that's being exerted. But right now, the people of Latin America need as much help as they can get. And I'm willing to give that trade-off if it means the people of Latin America can have better lives.
Well, I think you're underestimating the trade-off because I've shown that it's a significant impact.
I mean, I'd argue even with US influence, the people of Latin America with aid will have a better life after this legislation than before this legislation.
Okay.
Senator Hassan Ali.
Hi, Senator. So of the root causes of migration, they include wanting better quality access to healthcare and education. What exactly does today's legislation do to tackle those root causes?
Okay, so when we give aid to Latin America, we give them the rights to put it on their biggest issues. And if education and infrastructure, as I showed you, are their biggest issues, that's where a majority of the money is going to be directed.
Senator, do you think that $400 million is enough to fix the education healthcare systems of all Latin American countries?
But I think it's enough to give enough of a push so that when the legislation comes to renew the money, we can add even more if we see the right kind of progress going down.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Speaker is thanked and may return to mute. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, we're now in line for a speech in the negation. Any and all negative speakers, please rise. Senator Juneja.
I thank the chair for everyone's reference. Hi, my name is Senator Juneja. This is my first time speaking today's session. Very happy to be in the final round, and I'll be on the negation. For my judges, give me any sign or signal if y'all aren't ready. If not, I'm just gonna hop right into it. All right, we look good. 70 years ago, after World War II, in the wake of a global power vacuum and unprecedented uncertainty, this Congress adopted an ideology of untethered American exceptionalism and expansion. And when the dust finally cleared and clarity was achieved, we had attained global dominance. But we had neglected the faces and stories of millions who were casualties in that quest. It's because today is a continuation of this pattern that I negate. The entirety of the affirmation, from Senator Pang to Senator Jethwani Kaiser, have predicated their entire advocacy on this legislation on helping small and medium-sized businesses. Let me spend my next 4 minutes proving passing does the exact opposite. First, let's start by understanding that the aid under Senator Pang's bill is inherently short-term. Senator Beck, Hassan Ali, and Biram on my side all just asserted this. Let me be the first to prove it. The aid in this legislation will only be renewed in December if the flow of migrants to our southern border decreases by 30%. Senator Rubas, Liu, Jethwani Kaiser, and Landsman all argue that this bill makes that an achievable goal. Let me tell you that it's not only not achievable, it's nearly impossible. Kimberly Amadeo found for The Balance in December of 2020 that over the past 30 years, we have given $900 billion of economic aid to Mexico. And despite that, a report published in Statista in 2018 found that there hasn't been a single year where migration from Mexico to our southern border has decreased at all, let alone 30%. Here's some news for the affirmation. Our aid doesn't solve all issues in a country. People still want to come here. That means passing today means that the aid under this legislation will not be renewed for businesses in 5 months. Let me be the first to prove that this inherently short-term aid is actively worse than doing nothing. Fundamentally, passing destroys the private sector of every recipient country. Let me turn to the most qualified expert on this topic. Nobel Prize-winning economist Angus Deaton found with the Washington Post in October of 2015 that the global community discovered in the 80s that the more short-term aid businesses in a country get, the worse the economies are. Why is that? Here's the warrant that ends today's debate. The London School of Economics explains that foreign aid to businesses acts as an equalizer between inefficient and efficient companies, because when there are industry-level cash influxes, both inefficient companies and efficient companies are put on a level playing field. Eventually, over a few years, the market corrects itself because these cash influxes become proportionally less important as markets expand. The issue is, this legislation only gives 5 months. Why is equalizing the business playing field through short-term aid so bad? When we suddenly pull aid in December, thousands of inefficient businesses who have market share employ lots of workers, but are only able to sustain it because of American aid go out of business, collapsing local economies. Think of it like a localized version of the Great Depression. Understand, my ideas around short-term business aid aren't novel. We've known this for years. Shockingly, let me provide the first quantification for my side. The Washington Post further cites an empirical analysis of aid to Africa during the 1980s. Similar aid packages were found to have directly led to a 1.5% decrease in the continent's GDP. If those GDP losses are mimicked in Latin America when we pass, that would mean a loss of over $90 billion. Why does this argument alone win today's debate? Use every affirmative speech for my side going forward. Senator Pang, immigration from the region can't decrease if we're only further destroying the economy. Senator Huda, as economies shrink, infrastructure worsens. Senator Landsman, you want to help women in Latin America? I agree with you. We need to do that, but short-term aid increases their economic strife. Senator Kaiser, you argue that a worse economy causes more violence. I also agree with that, but when we pass, the Latin American economy gets worse. Acting like a savior will destroy the economies in Latin America. Don't do it. Negate.
Thank you for that speech of 4 minutes and 10 seconds. We're now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Any and all questioners, please rise. Senator Liu.
Hi.
Hey, so what keeps the aid here so short term? Like the whole idea is that we don't decrease migration, but doesn't addressing the root issues help us with that?
No, we've given $900 billion of aid. We haven't even seen a 1% decrease.
Okay, that's all I...
400 million won't decrease it by 30%.
Wait, we've never seen a drop in migration before?
I cited you a statistic.
Wait, okay, on top of that, if we were to fix the situation in the region, they would still want to leave?
$400 million can't fix it.
Wait, why would they want to leave
Senator Huda
in their region?
Hi, Senator, what's wrong with just giving a push in the money we're giving? And then if the aid actually pans out, just adding more money on top of that?
We can't do that because of the contingency clause under Section 3B of this legislation. The fundamental issue is that we're distorting normal market.
Okay, yeah, so I'll take you to the height of your argument. Let's say the contingency argument fails. If we've seen that aid has been working, even with the 400 million, what's wrong with us actually passing?
Long-term aid works. Long-term aid works. Short-term aid destroys economies.
Is there work to actually see if it works? And then even if the contingency clause fails,
we've tried it in Africa. It's failed. We know it doesn't work. Short-term aid is a failure.
In Africa, then there is.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Speakers, thank you and may return to mute. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, we're now in line for a speech in the affirmation. Any and all affirmative speakers, please rise. Senator Liu.
Thank you to Mr. President. Hey, all. Good morning, good afternoon, maybe. Regions and time is really weird. That's Senator Liu, spelled L-U-U. That's 2 U's, not 1, because double is always more fun. If you're not ready, just please interrupt me and I can obviously stop for you. I'm at the leisure of all those above me. But it looks like we're all happy and ready to begin. Thank you, judges. Wonderful, beautiful. I love smiles. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to the president. I have something to admit. I love superhero movies. And growing up, I was always captivated by the bravery of Steve Rogers and the heroism of Peter Parker. And I always thought that right here in the land of the free and home of the brave, we were the heroes too. But I learned that when it comes to acting like superheroes, it often doesn't work. And we've learned that before. But helping people in the real world doesn't require a special shield or even superpowers. It comes down to learning from our mistakes, deciding to help those who matter most. And you don't need to be a superhero to do that. That's why I ask you to affirm. So the biggest negation point that's been brought up is by Senator Beck and Juneja. They tell you that US aid can and never will work. Either it's distributed bad or it can't be passed out well. Here's the thing. Wouldn't you think that US aid knows about these problems? I'm going to let us in on a little secret. US aid is actually very aware of this problem and does something to fix it. They've developed plans to work around these issues and even combat them. Let me be the first person in this debate to prove that this plan is effective. Our legislation gives Latin Americans the help that they need. First, because US aid knows Latin America. The New York Times writes in April of 2019 that the vast majority of US aid goes to non-governmental organizations to ensure it's effective. From Senator Pang to Senator Huda, nobody on my side has given you actual data on US aid specifically helping Latin America. Let me be the only one to show you that and dispel Senator Hassanali and Juneja's concern that immigration doesn't decrease. The Congressional Research Service finds in September of 2019 that US aid programs in Guatemala helped create over 78,000 new jobs. In Honduras, it helped lift 90,000 people out of extreme poverty. And in El Salvador, US assistance programs dealing with the prevention of violence reduced crime by 53% in 3 years alone. Senators Juneja and Hassanali, this one's for you. Beneficiaries of Feed the Future initiative in Honduras became 78% less likely to immigrate than the Honduran population as a whole. Our Smart Water Practice program reduced crop loss by 70% for 3,000 farmers in Central America. And most notably, in Guatemala, US aid reached 100,000 people through the Catholic Relief Service, slashing extreme poverty in half. You know what I call that? A winning game plan. And we just have to stick to it. But everybody on my side has brought up small examples about how aid works. Let me be the first to actually show you why we need more, because it mitigates the threat of gangs and terrorists in the region. An April 25th, 2018 report by the Washington Post finds that gang violence and terrorist groups have made 17 of the top 20 countries in the world for murder rates in Latin America. In fact, 4 of them make up a quarter of all murders in the world. And to put it plainly, cruelty and terrorism have led to devastation and the suffering of millions. And everybody should be asking themselves one question. Can our aid fix this? And yes, it actually can. Daniel Tyrone from the Journal of Conflict Resolutions finds in 2017 that every $60 million in investment, we see terrorism decrease by 10%. Senators Beck and Hassanali, for immigration to decrease, we need to make sure that people don't feel the need to flee. That's what you do when you pass this legislation. But secondly, more aid means more federal direct investment. This takes down Senator Biram and Juneja's entire argument about dependency. Our aid helps build the infrastructure necessary to develop the economy from within while inviting aid from the outside. A November 2012 report by the Journal of World Development finds that every one additional aid dollar per capita draws in $2 of federal direct investment per capita in developing countries. Our aid allows us to break the cycle of poverty and violence and invite long sustainable aid from the outside, making a prosperous future. But make sure that we aren't the only investors. And I may not be Captain America. Senator Biram isn't Iron Man. And this Congress might not be the Avengers. But what I still believe is that 12 people who use their voices to fight for what we believe in is the greatest superpower out there. And even if we aren't always the heroes, we can do
Thank you for
something
that speech
today.
of 4 minutes and 10 seconds. We're now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Any and all questioners, please rise. Senator Juneja.
If $900
Hi, Senator.
billion of aid, 2,000 times the amount we're giving in this legislation, hasn't caused an even 1% decrease in migration,
that's just
why will 400 million?
No, that's just like looking at like specific programs that have failed. As a whole, as I proved to you, USAID's been effective at aiding the region.
Whoa. No, I'm just citing immigration rates from Mexico to our southern
Oh, yeah.
border.
And I just cited that people like literally said they would stop immigrating because of USAID.
Right.
That's what
You're
makes this
citing a
legislation
poll.
so good.
I'm citing the literal trends in immigration.
I cited the trends back to you, showing that, and I also
Senator
explained why
Biram.
they do that.
Hey, Senator,
Senator.
how is this aid sustainable if $800 billion
Right.
hasn't accomplished what you think $400
No,
million?
no, no. Here's the cool thing about our aid under this new system. It invites federal direct investment, which allows other countries to get involved.
So USAID has just been squandering this $800 billion for the
No,
last
so
7 years.
most importantly, like the efficacy reports that we ask under this legislation haven't been something that have truly existed before.
And how do we even know that this is true? If we don't have the efficacy reports yet, how can we guarantee?
That's why we developed it, because we didn't have it. That's
But
why
if we
you
don't
have
them
to
in the
pass this
status quo,
legislation.
what guarantee do we have? Like, that doesn't make sense. If the efficacy
Thank you.
we
Questioning
allow
time has
support small
elapsed.
businesses.
Speaker is thanked and may return to mute.
Thank you.
Speaking as that was a speech in the affirmation, we're now in line for a speech in the negation. Any and all negative speakers, please rise. I'll call once more for a negative speech. Any and all negative speakers. Seeing no negs, the chair highly frowns upon a one-sided debate, but with that, we will have to go back to the affirmative. Any and all affirmative speakers for our second consecutive speech. Senator Konda, unopposed.
I thank the chair. Howdy all, this is Representative Konda. I have been having a few internet issues where I've had to refresh my internet. So I'm asking if it's possible for like the judges or even just the competitors to turn off their cameras. Sorry for the hassle, but.
Yes, we can do that. So everybody just turn off your cameras, and then later when you're questioning the speaker, if you want a question, you can turn it back on. But for now,
thank you so much, guys.
I'll keep my camera on just so you can pin me for time signals. But yes, that's fine.
Okay. And just to clarify, this is an affirmation because I know we had a few problems.
Yep.
Simon Bolivar, a Venezuelan military and political leader, led Latin America to independence from the Spanish Empire. He is known today as El Libertador, or the liberator of the Americas. Bolivar brought the first semblance of peace and stability to Latin America away from imperialistic empires. It is only fitting that we use his wisdom to navigate this round. Bolivar first primarily tells us that a state too expensive in itself ultimately falls into decay. I passed this bill for the sole reason that it decreases corruption. Why is corruption uniquely a prerequisite to everything in this round? Social Research Journal corroborates that if an economy is highly corrupt, then no small businesses can come about, run by women or not, Representative Landsman. Gang power and violence increases, Representative Beck, and investors don't invest in corrupt economies in the short or long term, Representative Biram and Veer. But the United Nations Industrial Development Organizations tells you how we can actually solve the corruption. A 1% increase in the market share of an SME in the sector is associated with a 2.6% decrease in bribery in that same sector. Undeniably, small business activity decreases corruption across the board. But why are small businesses uniquely not corrupt? Simple, because they're the only ones with the money, or rather, they're the only ones not with the money to evade taxes, give bribes, and dodge litigations. Those monies are only present in large corporations. For corrupt officials in the government, it's just not worth their time to engage in high-level corruption with small or medium corporations, because again, it's just not profitable. As a result, small and medium businesses engage in less voluntary corruption, but are consistently put at an economic disadvantage because they get less preferential treatment from the government. Now, here's where we go back to Mr. Bolivar. He tells us, do not adopt the best systems of government, but the ones most likely to succeed. Small businesses do engage in corruption, but it's not their fault. Notice why I specifically say they don't engage in voluntary corruption. Hernando de Soto, in his book, The Other Path, writes that the number one barrier to opening a small business, again, the number one barrier, which nobody's even discussed in today's round, is the massive cost of bribery to pay off local officials. This makes opening a small business more costly as they're forced to engage in bribes and discourages the expansion of small businesses in the first place, which again are arguably the least corrupt business model in the whole region. How does this bill solve that? By creating a third option. This bill's funding can circumvent the cost of bribes for SMEs. They are immune to the barriers created by corrupt officials. Unilaterally, this bill increases the prevalence of small and medium companies inside of the Latin American economy. Representative Quesada, you tell me that US companies are exploitative, and you're absolutely right. It's why I support making Latin America more independent by building strong domestic businesses. Representative Veer, Hassan al-Sali, and literally the rest of the negation all tell you that we're not giving aid to them in the long term because a 30% decrease in migration is impossible. Literally, just read the bill. In section 4, it says that ultimately the decision-making power of actually keeping the aid or not keeping the aid lies with Congress. Meaning if we see any meaningful change, it doesn't matter if we actually reach that 30% mark, we can still keep the aid in place. But remember what I told you at the beginning of my speech. A 1% increase in the market share of a SME in the sector is associated with a 2.6% decrease in bribery in that same sector. That is long-term improvement. Let's weigh this round. Senator Biram, Veer, and Quesada all tell you that long-term aid is non-existent. That's not true. Short-term aid causes long-term decreases in corruption, garnering long-term economic growth even after we remove aid. Thus, both in the short with humanitarian aid that Senator Kaiser brings up, and the long term with organic small business growth and corruption decrease, the affirmation wins both voters. In 1813, Bolivar finally achieved his long-standing dream of independence. His work has lit the way for future generations. Similarly, this Congress must light the way for small businesses, enacting our hope for a more equitable Latin America. Pass.
Thank you for that speech of 4 minutes and 5 seconds. We're now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Any and all questioners, please rise. Senator Rubis.
So how does the money get to small businesses in this bill?
In this legislation, I believe it says that like USAID is going to be directly providing that supplement.
No, under Section 2, it passes through governments in Latin America. So if you're worried about these governments' corruption, why are they going to fix that themselves?
I feel like that's like a chicken and the egg problem where we're now locked into never giving funding. I think USAID is experienced enough to root out like understand when they're being like cheated.
But why don't we give money directly to the businesses? What you thought?
I don't think that's possible because we don't know what businesses exist.
Why not?
Because they're small businesses, oftentimes not cataloged.
Hi, Senator. I just have a quick question to move
Hi.
along. Considering that this bill is so amorphous in its legislative intent and where we're directing funding, considering USAID's relatively colorful history, how can we ensure that these funds are allocated responsibly?
Right. So I understand that USAID has like a less than favorable history, which is exactly why I support this legislation, which in the long term decreases Latin America's dependence on the United States.
Right, of course. But how can we ensure that USAID does not interfere with the actual benefit of these funds? I think that that's definitely a concern.
Because the funds and the status quo are under this legislation are mostly going to be like grants and funding.
Thank you.
Bills.
Questioning time has elapsed. Speaker is thanked and may return to mute. I would invite the chamber and the judges to turn their cameras back on. But with that, since we have exhausted all speeches on this piece of legislation, the chair will unilaterally move this item to the previous question. So with that, all those who wish to pass legislation regarding aid enhancement to Latin America, please raise a hand or a placard. 1, Rubis. 2, Jitwani Kaiser, 3, Liu, 4, Konda, 5, Huda, 6, Landsman. All right. All those who wish to fail. 1, Pang, 2, Juneja, 3, Beck, 4, Quesada, 5, Hassan Ali, and 6, Biram. So are there any abstentions? There should be none. All right, on a vote of 6-6, this bill is tied. So I'll go ahead and break the tie. I vote to pass the bill. All right, Senator Rubis, is that a motion?
Yes, seeing an after break and debate, I move for a 10-minute recess.
Motions for 10 minutes, is there a second? Seconded, are there any opposed? Seeing no opposition, so ordered. Please be back here at 1:55 Eastern.
Do we have a sponsor yet? I think everyone's gone. Hopefully someone steps up.
We've got really great splits, and there's a few people here with bad recency, so it'd be really great if you could throw a sponsor together. Hey, are people starting to come back? Because I wanted to make sure we have one last time to take splits before we have to get started. So again, did anybody put together a sponsor by any chance? That's great. Or at least our splits still even? AFs? Okay, and then negs?
Yeah, can any of the F, because I don't think anyone wants to do our third or the other bill. It's not even on the docket. I mean, like extending the recess, even after like a 10-minute recess, probably wouldn't be great, but like we can't do anything without a sponsor.
Wait, so we need one neg to flip AF anyway, right?
I think
Well, I just don't think we had everyone. We had 9 people raise placards, I think.
Sorry, y'all. I'm an F.
Okay, then we don't need a neg to flip AF, but we do need a sponsor.
Senator Liu, is that a sponsor F or is that just
No, I'm sorry. That is not a sponsor F.
Can anyone on the app like change it to a sponsor? Like if we like add time or anything?
We just want to let you know we have 30 seconds left in this recess. For Mr. Burlat, I think we're missing a judge right now, as in like they've dropped out of the call.
Yeah, I'm taking attendance to try to figure that out.
Yeah, I think it is Judge Ago Otogile, but I don't know if that was during the speech because I didn't have anybody drop out during Senator Conda's speech or during the cross examination.
No, we had 25 as of the beginning of recess. Let me call.
Wait, so
okay, cool. Just wanted to let you know.
President, could we just put an indefinite recess till the judge?
I was gonna say I would just move this to an indefinite recess until we can sort out when we get the judge back. So you guys can continue to discuss.
Sounds great. So could you raise your hand if you have like an early F? Or like anything that can be changed to a sponsor?
Especially because I gave second F last time, I would really prefer not to.
Yeah, I sponsored last time, so there's nothing I can do.
I was like first next, so I don't think I can go super early.
Is there anyone who has an F that's done right now? Because I don't want to give mine early.
I wouldn't personally worry about early versus late. We need to get the round started. Do not forget your hard stop is 4 p.m.
Is there anyone who could have a sponsor ready with like a 5-minute recess? I have a feeling the judges would really appreciate it. Let's just see the Fs again. Raise your placards.
You know what, guys? I'm on the negation, but I'll take one for the TOC finals.
I think our judge has returned. Judge Ago Odegilik, are you good to go, or do you need a few seconds?
Am. Thank you, Mr. Pio, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly.
Okay, awesome. And just to make sure you didn't miss any of that last speech with Senator Conda, is that correct? Judge?
I'm sorry.
Did you miss any of the content of the last speech or the last like questioning blocks?
No. Have we not just returned from recess?
Yeah, we're good. I just wanted to make sure just in case. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, it was just the recess and the Zoom was going, so I'm good, Mr. Pio, and I'm always ready. I'm here.
All right, awesome. Then let's get back to debate. So with that, I just want to remind the chamber, our next legislative item is still on the table. So in order to take it off, a formal motion needs to be made. Senator Jithwani Kaiser, is that a motion?
I was first going to move to a 5-minute recess.
Okay, the motion is for 5 minutes. Is there a second? Any opposed? Seeing none, we're now in line for a 5-minute recess. Please be back at about 1:03.
So just a quick thing. If none of the AFs can like prep, I'll flip from neg to aff and give the sponsor in 5 minutes. So just for the sake of the round, because none of you guys are willing to, but I'll try
Thank you
my
so
best.
much. And that gives us like a perfect 6-6 split too, right?
So that was the flip
Awesome.
that needed to happen anyway. Thank you, Senator Conda.
Could someone remind me of the bill that we are planning on debating next?
So the next bill on our agenda is the Western Hemisphere Strategy Act.
And so that's what we plan on table and then debate.
So yeah, we're gonna need to take it off the table and we're gonna debate it. Yeah, it's finals B.
Thank you.
I'm sure all of the judges have access, but just to prevent any confusion, I did link the bill packet in the chat just so that that's there as a resource.
Hi, I have a question for the parley.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can you amend a bill before the sponsorship?
I would think it needs to be debated at least once on the spot. Like you could, I in my brain, we need a sponsor and then an amendment.
Okay,
Like
I
the
see.
bill needs
Thank
to
you.
actually exist before we amend it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Senator Conda, just to quickly check in, would you be good to go in like a minute when the recess ends, or will you need an extension of the recess?
Would it be possible to like 3 more minutes? I don't know.
Yeah, we have 30 seconds left in this recess. So
Motion.
Senator Kaiser.
Extend the recess by 3 minutes.
I don't know if a lot of people are back yet, but is there a second to that? Actually, let's just wait for everybody to come back. Okay, cool. I'm seeing a lot of placards. Okay, Are there any objections? Seeing none, we'll extend for another 3 minutes. That'll give you until about 07.
Also, by the way, really quickly, if like people are still here, is there like a first nag so we don't run into like the same problem?
I'd
I
assume
think Gloria said that they had one.
Oh, I just meant I had the first night like last time, so
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see.
I would assume that because it was initially neg heavy, it shouldn't be a problem. And I'd really hope it isn't a problem, but I don't think we have to caution against that right now.
All right, just about 30 seconds left in this recess. So if everybody wants to turn their cameras on, that would indicate that you're ready to resume. Once we have everyone back, we'll jump back in. Okay, I know. Okay, cool. Then I think all judges are good, and then all competitors are back as well. So at 2:07 Eastern, I'll call the session back into order. We need a motion to get that bill off the table. Senator Huda.
Motion to take the bill of Western Hemisphere Security Strategy Act of 2022 off the table.
Is there a second? Are there any objections? Seeing no objections, this bill will come off the table and onto our active legislative docket. So with that, we're now in line to debate the Western Hemisphere Strategy Act. For the reference of the judges, that's Finals Bill B on the legislative packet. So are there any authors? Seeing none, are there any sponsors? Senator Conda, unopposed.
Hey guys, this is Senator Conda, second and likely last time today, speaking a little bit earlier and on the wrong side. But I think it'll all work out. Just set my timer. Once again, just because I've been having internet issues all day, if you guys could maybe turn off at least the competitors. Thank you so much.
This will be the same when you want to question the speaker, you can just turn your camera back on, but otherwise I'll just keep it off for now. Or sorry, keep it on for now, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Sorry. The purpose of American foreign policy is not to provide an outlet for our own sentiments of hope or indignation. It is to create real policy in a real world. As such, we have to treat it with adequate respect. The negation is going to come up here for the rest of today's debate and try and mar today's legislation, portraying it as an imperfect solution to Latin America's conundrums. But it's because we live in an imperfect world that today's legislation is the perfect fit for our modern day political solutions or problems. That's why you pass today's legislation. But primarily, let's address the problem that today's legislation tries so desperately to fix. Foreign Policy magazine explains to us, for years, this Congress's policies on Latin America have been completely incoherent. With each new actual presidential term, the policies have radically shifted. For example, take the Trump administration. The Trump administration took almost all of our aid that this Congress approved out of Latin America. As a result, we saw increasing rates of economic failure, as well as increasing rates of violence in Latin America. The problem is that President Trump's actual policies weren't continued into the Biden administration. Biden administration immediately reinstated aid and then even increased that aid even more. There is zero consistency in American foreign policy. And here's why that's so problematic. Rescue.org explains to us that homicides in Latin America have increased dramatically. The region still has the highest murder rate in all the world, with almost 41 murders per 100,000 people. It is clear this Congress's irrational decisions in Latin America is creating a more violent world. It is because we consider the safety of those Latin American citizens, the same ones we've exploited in the past, that you passed today's legislation. But next, I'm going to go through every single specific provision provided in Section 2 to prove to you why today's legislation is uniquely solvent for those issues. Let's start with Section 2.1. Section 2.1 essentially states that United States as well as Latin American countries will just build bilateral relations. That's incredibly important because as the Council on Foreign Relations explains to us, in the past, the United States' relationship with countries in Latin America has been increasingly poor for the same reasons that Representative Casado told us in the previous debate. It's because we've exploited them in the past. If we extend an olive branch of peace, it ensures that our relationship gets better for the future. That's incredibly important because it's the first prerequisite step for literally everything else in Section 2. Let's move on. Section 2.2 essentially states that activities to counter malign influence by state actors and transnational organizations will be instituted. Here's what that means. The Peterson Institute explains to us that the majority of illegal opiates in the world actually come from Latin America. Under today's legislation, we target the flow of those drugs and decrease the influence of them in the actual state affairs themselves. Essentially, we decrease the prevalence of drug money in gangs in Latin America, a unique benefit of today's legislation. But third, you decrease the proliferation of gangs with Section 2.3 by actually enacting efforts to disrupt, degrade, and counter other transnational illicit trafficking organizations. Again, gang violence, as the UNICEF quantifies to us, has forced close to 120,000 people to vacate from the region. This mass exodus of people cannot go unheard. But let's go to the fourth, the problem with corruption. My entire speech on the previous legislation was predicated on corruption, and it's the very reason I'm passing this one too. It's because corruption is such a massive problem in the status quo. The Center on Strategic and International Studies explains to us that because of corruption in Latin America, they're losing 2% of their GDP every year. Finally, sections 5, 6, and 7 counter human rights violations. Washington Office on Latin America explains that human rights violations are becoming increasingly common. We have to do things to decrease violence against women, against children, and minority populations in the region. The only way is by passing this legislation. Look, wars of nations may be fought to change maps, but wars on ignorance, those are fought to map change. Pass.
Thank you for that speech of 4 minutes and 7 seconds. We're now in line for 4 blocks of questioning. Any and all questioners, please rise. Give everyone a few seconds here. All right. Between those standing, this will go to Senator Pang.
Hey, we've had anti-narcotics operations in Latin America before, right? You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. I didn't get to this, but this bill is very non-specific in that the Secretary of State can consider previous actions and like make those counter narcotics efforts different from the past.
Okay, so what would that look like?
That's for the Secretary of State to determine.
Okay, so obviously, if we've already seen that intervention in the past just make cartels angrier, how is there a single positive alternative that's not going to make that happen?
Okay, the alternative is just letting cartels kill people. I'm not quite signed up for that.
Senator Kaiser.
Hey, what does security relationships with Latin America mean?
Which specific section are you referring to, or like part?
Section 2, Part 1, right? Bilateral and multilateral security assistance.
It means we coordinate with these international governments more often.
I mean, yeah, like what does that take form as, right? Are we giving guns to, again, corrupt states? Like, how does this work?
It can mean we're like doing things like it can be like as docile as like intelligence sharing or like guns. Again, that's up to the Secretary of State.
Again, is intelligence sharing a great idea with a corrupt state?
It is when they have the common goal of fighting gang violence. Like even they don't want gangs.
Senator Quesada.
Thank you, Senator. One section of this bill says that it'll increase activities to support strong law enforcement institutions. How has that played out for Honduras in the past?
Right. So I think the framework of today's legislation is that we can learn from our past mistakes because we're not giving specific provisions. It's up to the Secretary of State. And if we don't like it, we can just remove it in the past or in the future.
Okay, but how are we going to change if the Secretary of State's incentives to go into Latin America haven't changed?
Well, I'd argue that they have changed, especially from the previous administration.
Senator Huda.
Hi, Senator. Has American presence in Latin America boded well in the past?
Not as a whole, holistically, no.
Yeah, we've literally jump-started 2 coups in Honduras.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we increase that presence through this legislation, why is that a good thing?
Okay, because we're not necessarily instituting like a coup in this legislation. Like, for example, section 2, 6, and 7 literally just continue support for humanitarian efforts and a woman.
When our presence is there, it's shown to like have dissent.
Yeah, but there's like different forms of our presence. Like there's a difference between like helping women escape like domestic
Thank you.
abuse.
Questioning
and, like,
time
guns.
has elapsed. Speaker is thanked and may return to mute. The chair thanks you. All right, I would invite the chamber to turn their cameras back on. I'm gonna give everyone a few seconds before we move to the next speech. Senator Liu, is that a motion?
Yeah, motion to approach the chair with an amendment.
Is there a second? Okay, it's seconded. Are there any opposed? Seeing none, go ahead and send that to me in the chat. All right, while I review that amendment, we'll go on to the next speech. So we need a first negation. Any and all negative speakers, please rise. I'll call one more time. Any negs? Okay, this doesn't look too good. So Senator Kaiser.
1 minute in-house recess.
Motions for 1 minute recess. Any seconds? Seconded. Any opposed? Seeing none, we'll have a 1 minute in-house recess. Please discuss.
So I was under the impression we had a perfect split.
Yeah, so I have a neg, but I sponsored last time. I saved y'all once. I don't like I can give it if I absolutely have to, but I don't want to have this finals round where I give like 2 pieces of ref because I gave the first F and the first neg, right? So
my neg is round. I can try to step up if this chamber like need. If there's anyone else that's like a first neg prepared, if you could stand up, that'd be great. Otherwise, I could try to change mine into the first neg.
To the chair, should I be sending my amendment to you or the parliamentarian to rule as germane?
You can send it to me first, and then I will confer with the parliamentarian.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, our 1 minute has elapsed. So Barring any other motions, we still need a first negation speech. Any and all negative speakers, please rise. Senator Huda, thank you.
Hey everyone, that's Senator Huda speaking a little earlier than expected, but anything to keep the flow of debate going. Just give me 1 minute to pull up my timer. And just assume, I'm just gonna assume all the judges are ready. Just give me any indication if you're not. Yeah. The power of the United States to create change in regions worldwide should never be understated. But it's crucial to remember that this power goes both ways. If exercised improperly, as in today's legislation, the change we make is only for the worse. Today, you fail. Now let's clear up a key misconception in today's debate, that today's legislation is key to deter influence from other countries in Latin America. That's not true, because for every single step that countries like China and Russia are making with Latin America militarily, they're taking 3 large steps economically. The Council for Foreign Relations on April 12th, 2022 explains that China is South America's top trading partner and a major source of both foreign direct investment and lending in energy and infrastructure, including through its Belt and Road Initiative. This Strategy Act won't do anything to curb the influence that China and Russia put on Latin America unless we meet them on the economic side. But let's look at why outside countries are even able to get a foot in the door when it comes to Latin America. The Guardian explains on May 3rd, 2018, that souring attitudes toward the United States throughout the region over trade and social regions, the rise of populist candidates, and the deepening internal economic and immigration challenges facing many Latin American countries create favorable circumstances for Russia and China to advance their interests. The diplomat furthers in September 2021 that in Latin America, China doesn't seek political influence via structural changes in the governments or through the military, like the United States has done in the past. Instead, China establishes different levels of dependency in countries that expand over time and merge or deepen depending on the profile of each country. That means, even with today's legislation, we still keep Latin American countries under the rule of China and Russia. Today's bill doesn't stop that reliance. It just puts worse policies in place. But if today's legislation doesn't do anything to deter China, at least it leaves Latin America a little safer, right? Wrong. Our do-good, feel-good policy in Latin America may help some of you sleep better at night, but Latin Americans sleep worse. Senator Conda argued how we save 40 homicide rates per 100,000 citizens if we pass today's legislation. Let's understand how we literally helped cause this homicide rate. That's because American support for Latin American militaries inevitably leads to human rights abuses. Let's look at past precedents. The Portland State University finds on May 21st, 2021, that the United States provided $6 million in aid to Guatemalan armed forces under the Military Assistance Program, along with $11 million in American military equipment. Under the presidency of Mendez Montenegro and the involvement of the Green Beret soldiers, thousands of innocent civilians were killed through the work of the United States government, few being actual guerrilla forces. After our aid to Guatemala, political assassination on a mass scale became the new norm. And the worst part, that's not even the only incident. But Senator Conda argues that we only help women and children under this legislation, so we don't need to worry about outside armies. That's only Section 2, Item 7. Senator, I'd urge you to look at every other single thing in Section 2 because it puts our armies forefront into Latin America. And that's why it's bad. Because back in 2009, the United States influenced a Honduran coup when the Honduran army in June 28, 2009, followed orders and ousted President Manuel Zelaya. Shortly after the coup, the United States froze aid to the Honduran government for an issue we literally created. Senator Conda argues, though, with increased presence, we decrease gangs. But like death rates, we also cause this. Because in Honduras, the coup destroyed all of the progress that they made for decades. And after the country was destroyed from the coup, more people turned to gangs. It's clear, American involvement in Latin American countries doesn't bode well for these citizens. That's why we have to make sure we counter them on the economic forefront, not militarily. Negate.
Thank you for that speech of 4 minutes and 9 seconds. We're now in line for 4 blocks of questioning. That's 2 minutes total. Any and all questioners, please rise. Senator Konda.
How can you tell me for sure that the only form of like assistance under this legislation is going to be military?
Okay, so in section 2, we can just go line by line, right? A lot of the provisions in section 2 are based around a military.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, who actually decides what's going to happen? The Secretary of State, right?
Yeah, the U.S. government. And as I showed you in the past,
okay, yeah,
because we've literally issued coups in 2 separate countries.
Right. So if the bill comes back to us and it says we're going to institute a coup, we can just fail it 90 days from now, right?
Someone's like instigating the coup, right? It's not like we're going to stop it. We didn't stop
Senator
it.
Liu.
Hey, Senator. So when it says disaster relief, does that mean we're just going to send in our military to stand around and do something?
Okay, yeah. So we can just go like little pieces. I'm pretty sure that's like section 2, item 6, right?
Okay, there's also things that empower women and feminist movements in the region. How is the military involved in that?
Piece of legislation. I'm not saying every item under this legislation is a bad thing. I'm all for helping the women and children in Latin America. I'm just saying the other provisions under this.
The alternative to helping them is Chinese influence. Why should that continue?
I told you that Chinese influence already occurs because when we help them.
Senator Rubis.
You tell us about issues with U.S. policy and the status quo. Doesn't failing this bill maintain current policy?
No, so that issues in these are the issues that happened were when we previously tried to put our military into Latin America. That's the same thing we continue when we affirm today's piece of legislation.
So our status quo of objectives in Latin America is causing all of these problems. At the very least, why should we not get a report on how to positively change those objectives?
Okay, I'm just saying that when we put our militaries into Latin America and start putting a forefront into the war going on there, we hurt the people of Latin America because we previously haven't.
Senator Landsman.
Hi, Senator. So considering that this legislation stipulates an increased amount of transparency in law enforcement, why is that a bad thing when it comes to making sure all of these other impacts come to fruition?
Okay, because it's through the other initiatives that this legislation puts in place. Like if we look at the first 3 pieces, which is increasing bilateral security and assistance, going after
the cite gangs as a pervasive issue. Why wouldn't we want to increase security?
Because when we put our military into Latin America, we increase the prevalence of gangs being there.
The United States has other amenities.
Our presence in Latin America.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Speaker is thanked and may return to mute. All right, so before we proceed to the next speech on this legislative item, I will rule on the amendment submitted to the chair by Senator Liu for the last speech. So for the reference of the chamber and the judges, the amendment text reads, amend section 2, so that's the section with I think 8 different like subsections in it. Amend section 2 and add line 9 to ensure the rights of racial and ethnic minority groups and indigenous peoples. After conferring with the parliamentarian of the Senate, we ruled that this is a germane amendment. So in order to debate it, it requires a 1/3 second from the chamber, which of 12 people would be 4 senators. So I will call for seconds to that amendment to be debated. So that does pass the 1/3 threshold. So we would now commence debate on the amendment from Senator Liu. I'll call for an affirmative speech on said amendment.
I have a quick question for the parley. Sorry, parley, would these be considered the total in the base 2 requirement? Are we scoring them as regular speeches?
Yep, it's the same as a speech. It's just the amendment itself. It doesn't fall into an affirmative. It's the aff of the amendment.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, so precedence and recency for the speeches on the amendment will not change, if that helps anybody. So I'll call for any speeches. Senator Liu, unopposed.
Thank you. And just to confirm with the chair, that is a full 4-minute speech.
Correct. It'll still be 4 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the president. All right. That is Senator Liu, spelled L-U-U, speaking for the second time in this legislative session on this amendment. Just give me a sign if you aren't ready. I am so happy to be here. But like quickly before I begin, I just want to say it's actually like a dream to be in this round with all of you. And I want to give a special thank you to like everyone watching, my friends, especially my coaches, Mr. Garrett, Mr. Quest, mom and dad, any friends, hi. And I'm just happy to be here with all of you today. So I hope. Awesome. Beautiful. I already talked to you about heroism in my last speech, but what I didn't bring up is what makes a hero. Let's introduce to you one element of the hero's journey. It's simple. Our protagonist is a person who may have a checkered history and maybe a few mistakes, but when the villain rises to do bad, the hero rises to meet them. And sometimes we may not even know we have the ability to be a hero, but when it comes time to step up, we need to take action and pass my amendment. Senator Huda leaves off the negation and makes this whole advocacy about Chinese influence, but that's the exact reason you pass this legislation. I affirm this legislation and my amendment to counter Chinese corrupting influence because China and Latin America's partnership is appealing to both sides. The Journal of Current Chinese Affairs reports in December of 2021 that in 2017, Panama became the first Latin American country to officially endorse the Belt and Road Initiative. And today, there are now 19 BRI countries in the region, including Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, the 4 largest economies in the region. They are now closely following the initiative. But Senator Liu, how big could that be? How could that be? Senator Huda, these countries are seriously considered joining the investment because China might only be their last chance. This is why any negation speaker that comes up here and talks about the harm of aid misses the point of today's debate. Aid will exist whether we pass or fail. I just think it's clear whose aid is more harmful. Our bill lets us step up with a much safer alternative. As the Journal of Chinese Affairs writes on October 29th of 2021, in a study of 537 donations in every Latin American country, it was revealed that China's success focuses on aiding countries that feel abandoned by the United States, and countries accepting their aid feel like there is no option left. In fact, our destruction of Cuba and Venezuela's economies allowed China to gain so much leverage that post-pandemic, their entire economic survival depends on Chinese aid. China picked up where we dropped the ball, but we can do the same thing to them. Section 2 develops a plan that offers investment in 7 different areas of domestic policy in Latin America, with more bilateral cooperation and dedication to long-term prosperity. And by now, it should be clear that this is way different and much better than China's short-term approach, because we give benefits that they don't. Why is that so important? Firstly, it helps prevent a humanitarian crisis at the border. The Migration Policy Institute wrote in November of 2021 that 92% of immigrants from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras cited economic stability as the reason they chose to migrate. Our solution fixes that. The World Development Journal writes on October of 2018 that every 1% increase in humanitarian aid decreases migration from the recipient country by 1%. We get to improve the conditions of the region so they aren't forced to leave it in the first place. But more importantly, it prevents the flood that China could create. Al Jazeera writes in August of 2021 that the GDP of 8 different BRI member countries was decreased by China forcing them to owe back debt at a rate of 50%. That continues if you don't pass this legislation. That's why countries will prefer us over China, and it's why you affirm. The humanitarian crisis at the border is nothing compared to what it could be 5 years from now if we do nothing. That, Senator Huda, is the world of the negation. An affirmation victory prevents that from happening. But secondly, my amendment, we grant protection to marginalized groups. The Council on Foreign Relations writes in March of 2021 that the BRI spreads authoritarian practices to any country that joins them, influencing leaders to restrict civil liberties. And as Amnesty International writes in March of this year, racism, discrimination are prevalent across the Americas with inadequate access to health services and social benefits for indigenous groups. China's BRI doesn't stop this from happening. If anything, it encourages this. That's why I added my amendment to address race-based discrimination. That's important for 2 reasons. First, if we do nothing, this will continue. Second, China makes it worse. Whether or not we want to admit it, we may not always be the hero. But heck, we have a chance to do something today. China stands against the voice of the innocent. I was taught to be a voice for the voiceless, and I call upon this chamber to use our power for good.
Thank you for that speech of 4 minutes and 10 seconds. We're now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Any and all questioners, please rise. Between those standing, Senator Hassan Ali.
Hi, Senator. So during the COVID pandemic, who gave Latin American countries more assistance and relief?
Right. So we had this thing, China had this thing called mask diplomacy, where basically if a country felt left out by us, they would just step in and do the region. That's what's happening right now. But with our legislation, we step in and say, hey, we finally care about you now.
So considering that in their weakest and most vulnerable economic time, China stepped in to help them, what makes you say that they're suddenly going to be favorable to working with the US?
Yeah, because they literally realize that China is debt trapping them and trying to make them go like bankrupt. With the United States, we make sure that never happens in the first
Senator
place.
Biram.
Hey, Senator, under this bill,
Hey,
are
Senator.
we giving economic aid or are we giving security forces?
Right. We give both under this legislation. That's what 7 subsections do because we provide both.
6 out of the 7 subsections focus on security.
That
not
isn't
economic.
exclusive to just security. That includes developmental aid.
So when China imposes on other countries, do they do it economically or do they do it militarily?
Honestly, they do it both, and that's the problem.
No,
Our
they
legislation
predominantly
steps
do it
in and lets us
economically.
be the alternative.
how
You
are
don't
we
have to be
countering-
committed to only security. We give economics.
Thank you. Questioning time has elapsed. Speaker is thanked and may return to mute.
Thank you.
Chair thanks you. Seeing as that was an affirmative speech on the amendment, Senator Liu, is that a motion?
Yeah, a motion for previous question on the amendment.
Okay, to clarify, the motion is to previous question the amendment, not the legislation. Is there a second? It's seconded. Any opposed? Seeing no opposition, we will move to previous question on the amendment. All those who wish to pass this amendment to legislation FB as written in the chat, please raise a hand or a placard. Give everyone a few seconds here. All right, I count 1, Juneja, 2, Huda, 3, Quesada, 4, Biram, 5, Landsman, 6, Rubis, 7, Konda, 8, Beck, 9, Pang, 10, Hassan Ali, 11, Liu, and 12 to 20, Kaiser. So that makes it unanimous. Congratulations, Senator Liu. Your amendment does pass. So after that is dealt with, we have amended this legislation to reflect as read in section 2 to add another provision to it. So we will return to debate on the original piece of legislation, no longer the amendment. So we're leaving off on a negative speech. So I'll call for any negation speakers on the legislation as amended. Are there any negation speakers? I'll call one more time. Senator Quesada.
Yes, I'll just take one for the team. Again, that's Senator Quesada, Quesada, speaking for the second and last time in this whole tournament. And so I'll begin on my first word. Earlier this year in February, I went to Honduras for the first time in 9 years. That's 9 years of a young boy being disconnected from his own country due to violence caused by US intervention. This year, however, I finally went back, and not for any old reason, but to see a historic moment, the inauguration of my country's first female president, and a leftist president at that. Since then, the nation has seen tons of reforms, including executive orders giving indigenous land back. But as I make this final speech, I have to warn you, because all of this progress could be destroyed if America decides to put its greedy foot through Latin America's door again. To show you what I mean, I'll use myself as an example, because I'm a living show of what happens when the US decides to intervene. First, fail this bill to protect Latin Americans from US violence. Senator Conda says the NEG will portray this bill as an imperfect solution, but that's not at all what I'm arguing. I'm going to explain to you why this bill means death. Let me add to Senator Huda's Honduras example with my own personal experience because I went through it in real life. Like he mentioned, the 2019 Jacobin magazine writes that in 2009, the US government intervened in Latin America. But Senator Huda doesn't tell you why this occurred. The US government was unhappy with the left-wing government of Honduras because they wanted to turn part of an airbase into a commercial airport. So what did they do? Negotiate? No, instead, they did what any freedom-promoting country would do, sent troops to Honduras to overthrow the elected president and replace him with a right-wing dictator who went on to ban gay marriage, imprison indigenous activists, and use the government to support drug trafficking networks. This rebukes Senator Conda's idea that we will see a reduction in drug trafficking. No, the US would rather support right-wing leaders and protect Americans from opiates. My family was directly impacted by this coup. I can still remember the horror on my mother's face as she learned about it. Senator Liu might pretend that his amendment would prevent this violence, but the US has already stated, for example, in Honduras, that it was going in to protect marginalized groups and democracies. on the surface. But because the US only assisted in putting in the right-wing dictator, they did not have to take any responsibility for the discrimination occurring. They just blamed that on the dictator after they left. So nothing changes with this amendment. Patrice McSherry, a UC Berkeley Latin American researcher, says US intervention is a euphemism for state-sanctioned terrorism. If Honduras was a good enough example, let's look at Operation Condor, which according to 2021 NBC article was when the US sent troops to Chile and Argentina and murdered 70,000 left-wing activists and imprisoned 400,000 more. And the way the activists were killed was that US helicopters took them thousands of feet in the air and dropped them into the oceans with weights so they would sink. This is just a clear example of why US intervention should not be expanded. And incentive is the key word in this round. Not one senator has spoken about incentive, so I'll be the one to do it. According to Jacobin in 2021, the US does indeed confirm that they still want control over the economies of Latin America and want companies like Dole to have stakes in its land. That's why Senator Rubas's argument in Crossx that we're going to see changes doesn't hold true. The Secretary of State has the same incentive. No one also explains the sketchy provisions in this bill, so I'll make them clear. Section 2 creates activities to counter malign influence by state actors and to increase strong law enforcement. This is the exact same language that allowed the US to ruin Honduras and terrorize activists. The problem is that as long as conservative administrations see left-wing policies as malign influence, they can interpret this legislation as a free pass to go into the region and escalate it more. I would argue that because this impact is scalar, adding more intervention makes it worse. You can't really add more and expect it to be fixed. Second, fail this bill to prevent US dictator training. Sometimes the US doesn't send its own troops to the scene because it doesn't want to take responsibility for crimes abroad. Instead, Davis Marcus of UTexas explained they use the loophole of radicalizing leaders to the right in schools so they can use their own militaries to protect capitalist interests. The horrible thing is that Section 2 of this bill continues this trend by proposing military training exercises with countries in Latin America. In the past, the US, for example, trained right-wing dictators in Panama, Manuel Noriega, who ended up killing LGBT activists. This is deadly, and it completely turns Senator Liu's misguided China argument, because the whole reason why people are turning to China is because of these past interventions. They see it as a risk and see China as an escape. If you want to stop Chinese intervention, stop ours and give America peace.
Thank you for that speech of 4 minutes and 10 seconds. We're now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Any and all questioners, please rise. All right, between those standing, this will go to Senator Conda.
Hey, Representative, does the current U.S. administration support far-right dictators that are like more abusive towards human rights violations?
I would argue yes. Like what people don't understand is that sure, Democrats might be like progressive domestically, but in foreign policy, they're not. And that's why Biden, for example, is still funding things like Bolsonaro in Brazil.
Okay, yeah, but even so, doesn't today's legislation change that policy because now we get a say in it?
No, because it still goes to the Secretary of State who has incentives to prioritize American multinationals.
We can deny
Senator Liu.
Hey, Senator. So I'm really worried about what will happen if China is the only influence in the region. How good are they for marginalized groups?
Well, I would argue that in places like, for example, Honduras, where they've literally seen the US put dictators and then LGBT rights got banned, what they're basically just trying to do is find—
Does China care about that more than us, though? Like, do they care more about these groups than this Congress?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I think the problem is that I turned your argument. China will escalate more.
What does Section 1 of this legislation do?
Section 1 basically— Well, Section 1 promotes like
the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense have to report to us about the strategy in Latin America. That's the oversight that you want.
But Congress tends to—
You and I can decide what
time
happens.
has elapsed. Speaker is thanked and may return to mute. And with that, my time as the chair has completed. So I will hand the virtual gavel over to the Honorable Senator Beck, who will take us home. For the judges, my name is Senator Wu. That's 2 letters spelled W-U. Thank you all for a great 33% of the session, and good luck. Thank you.
Gavel received, Senator Wu. Thank you so much. And yeah, once again, I'd like to echo all of my predecessors in congratulating you once again on making it to this great, really prestigious round. No, it's one of the greatest accomplishments in your career and just in the season in general. So congrats to all of you once again. I'm just going to be really quick in just going over my procedures. They largely follow what my predecessors did, although I like to follow my own personal motto of going big to the future of fast, fair, and equal representation. In terms of timing, I'll be using standard NSDA gaveling procedures, although we're using 4 minutes, but I will provide an additional 2-minute placard when 2 minutes have elapsed into your speech. Try to think of them as like a green light, traffic light, I guess. I'll provide another one at 3 minutes. This is like your second green light. And then I'll provide one more at 3:30 with an orange traffic light. And then one more at 3 minutes and 55 seconds when 3 minutes and 55 seconds have elapsed into your speech. And at 4 minutes, I'm going to start a 10-second visual hand countdown. And at 4:10, I'm going to cut you off. This is just to make sure that, number one, like, obviously, I want everyone to get the same amount of time to speak as possible. One competitor shouldn't be getting more time than the other. And past that, the TOC rules do say that you'll be penalized a point if you go over that. So please don't try to abuse that grace period. For questioning, I'm going to start a 10-second visual hand countdown, 20 seconds into your block, and at 30 seconds, I'm going to cut you off. Once again, I just want to make sure everyone is given the same amount of time to question and answer. On that note, in terms of recency, precedence and recency have already been established for questioning and speaking. I'll be following that. But after I've called on a speech or a question, I'm just going to be looking away for a couple seconds just so that we're accounting for everyone's connection quality differences so that, you know, I give everyone an equal amount of time to stand and, like, be recognized. All right. At this time, I think we're just going to proceed directly on to the next speech. But are there any questions on my procedure? Pretty similar. Nothing's really changed. All right. I don't see any, so let's move on then. At this point, I'm going to call on a speech in the affirmative. All affirmative speakers, please rise. All right. That'll go to Senator Landsman.
I thank the chair. Hi, that's Senator Landsman. So excited to be speaking for the last time today. As always, I'm at the discretion of all those above me. So any indication from my judges, Parley and PO, though I'm assuming everyone is ready, and I'll be more than happy to begin. So I guess it would be better to receive an indication if you're not ready.
A quick note to the chamber, here is my presiding officer spreadsheet. You'll find that it has everything you need for this round. And just one couple note, I noticed that we're having not that many speakers stand at once. So as a reminder to the chamber, we're in the 3rd cycle, so it'd be nice to get some more speakers standing so we can keep this round moving as soon as possible. So try to get the speeches ready, everyone. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, PO. So assuming in that time that everyone is ready, I'll begin in just a moment. It has been 5 years since the hashtag Ni Una Menos, or Not One Less, first ignited the spark of protest against femicide in Argentina. Spreading through South America like wildfire, it united women across borders to speak out against the constant violence they face, in the process calling out the very people meant to protect them, law enforcement. And yet the situation has only worsened globally. Today, I'd hope we share a unilateral focus, improving diplomacy and humanitarian relationships with Latin America and the Caribbean. While this chamber alluded to this and even debated an amendment, we have veered dangerously off track, and I intend to refocus this debate before it's too late. Senators Huda and Liu, we cannot let our worries about China cloud our advocacy as the livelihoods of Latin Americans are at stake, an impact this chamber has reprehensibly decided to ignore. Once again, we suffer complexity-based inaction. I'd like to direct this chamber's attention to Section 2.4, which refers to the advocacy for support and transparency in law enforcement and security. I truly believe that without this section, our intent is nothing more than goodwill, which is why I am proud to affirm. In the status quo, it is no secret that current law enforcement is corrupt and broken, with the Congressional Research Service in February corroborating that 18 of 32 countries in the region rank abnormally high on the Corruption Perception Index, and the 2021 CPI report even notes that the Americas have ground to a halt in the fight against corruption. The Global Corruption Barometer also reports that 1 in 3 people in Latin America and the Caribbean who had used a public service in 2017 reported having to pay bribes to do so. More specifically, however, Reuters in 2020 qualifies that Venezuelan law bars secret police from serving with criminal records, yet according to hundreds of submitted cases, at least 2 police officers from Maduro's pseudo-personal army have served time for murder, and countless others show that the same FAES precinct officers have long records. This secret police force has been linked to hundreds of deaths since its inception in 2017 and does not abide by human decency nor basic Venezuelan law. Senator Huda, corruption in law enforcement pervades every corner of human life. It bars the growth of democracy and objectively prevents justice from being more than an ephemeral concept, which is ultimately why we cannot afford to fail. Senator Quesada, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your perspective today. It is instrumental in advocating for change, but I feel that we pass for the holistic change in the status quo that this bill brings. Without reform, this does not happen. Transparency International in October of 2020 supports that the current duplicitous nature of security and law enforcement only has a deleterious deleterious effect on youth and state security, but due to the proximate link between these agencies and organized crime in the Western Hemisphere, we must pass. Senator Konda, I'd expand your advocacy and argue that we help a lot more than just women and children. Al Jazeera, just 3 days ago, reported that in Salvadoran investigative media found that President Bukele had negotiated with MS-13 leadership only to turn around and arrest 1,300 people under suspicion from gang affiliations in 3 weeks. All of these instances have commonality of corruption flourishing in secrecy, and the perversion of government and security thrives. When we have the chance to pass, it is a chance I am going to take. The current status quo is not one that I am willing to accept nor ordain. The effect that corrupted law enforcement and security has is parasitic, and thus our solution must start from the root of the problem. What this means today is we have the opportunity to intervene. Senator Hudda, you pledge your good faith to these regions, but argue we can't pass because this legislation will exacerbate the problem and even incur risk. The impact that transparency in law enforcement has means this will not come to fruition. Senator, when law enforcement promotes and supports human trafficking of young women or condones the murder of innocents, I cannot stand idly by. So please solve this problem at the root, stand for justice, and stand for Latin America. I thank the chair.
All right. Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 3 minutes and 49 seconds. We'll now move into 2 blocks of questioning. Just a quick note before we proceed, I'll be recognizing the next questioner in the chat between the forum block. But once again, if there's someone with better recency that stands after you, I'll issue a verbal correction in between the blocks. That being said, all questioners, please rise. All right, between the standing, I'll go first to Senator Quesada.
Hi, Senator.
Hi, Senator. Great speech. You mentioned the anti-femicide movement in Argentina. What was their stance on U.S. interventions?
I actually am not referring to the anti-femicide movement as a catalyst for the passage of this legislation, so that's not necessarily directly relevant. What I would say is that law enforcement increases the dangers that women face day by day in Latin America, and that is not something I am willing to condone as a member of a legislative body. That is reprehensible.
I'm trying to explain that the anti-femicide movement was against U.S. interventions because they were putting brutal police in.
Hi, Senator. Did Congress know about the 2009 Honduras coup before it happened?
I'm sure you can tell me, and I'd assume.
Yeah, we did. And then did we encourage that coup?
So while that happened in 2009, I'd argue that it's ridiculous to use past precedent right now when we have the power to make change and ensure that this doesn't happen again. You're standing in front of an extreme legislative opportunity, and it would be foolish to throw it away.
Isn't the only thing to look at is past precedents when we're looking like what in the past?
That is objectively untrue. All of the provisions in this legislation are specifically stipulated so as to prevent.
Thank you, senators. And with that, questioning time has last. Speakers are thanked and may return to mute. We're now in line for a speech in the negation. All negative speakers, please rise. All right, that will go to Senator Pang off of recency.
Thank you. This is Senator Pang, spelled P-A-N-G, speaking for the last time in this final session. I sponsored the last legislation that helps you fund my ballot, and I'll just take a few seconds of silence as a sign of readiness. I want to help Latin America. That's why I sponsored the last piece of legislation, and that's why I now oppose this one. Every person here has the same goal, whether we're standing on the affirmation or the negation. Here is why. Failing this bill is the only way to have any hope of achieving it. You stand with me in the negation to stop cartel escalation. One thing has made principally clear in this round by Senator Quesada, which is that intervening in Latin America doesn't solve the issue. Rather, I contend all it does is drive cartels to spread their violent operations. But here's where I separate myself from Senator Quesada in arguing that passing today doesn't just increase political violence, but all drug-related violence as well. At the very beginning of this debate, Senator Konda argues that when we increase our anti-narcotics operations, we'll be decreasing drug trade. Let's look towards past precedents and see why that just doesn't hold true. The Harvard International Review finds that after the US and Colombia placed major pressure on drug cartels in the area under the guise of Plan Colombia, Colombian cartels didn't just roll over and die. They simply shifted their supply routes to go through Mexico instead, and then became more and more violent to protect themselves. That's why, since its implementation in 2000, Plan Colombia has displaced more than 4 million people, with indigenous people being most affected. The very ones that Senator Liu champions in protecting in his amendment speech. The very people that Senator Conda tells us are fleeing their countries did so because of our actions. The Council of Foreign Affairs finds in their Global Conflict Tracker, updated just 3 days ago, that years after Plan Colombia was implemented, organized crime violence in Mexico skyrocketed and has since then taken over 150,000 lives. Innocent people caught in the crossfire of cartel greed and congressional mistakes. Senator Conda argues that this legislation is different from the past, but I invite everyone to read Section 2, which literally outlines efforts to disrupt, degrade, and counter transnational illicit drug trafficking, the exact thing we've done in the past. All today's legislation does is take Plan Colombia and then apply it to all of Latin America. Look towards Guillermo Trejo, the professor of political science at the University of Notre Dame, who finds in his research that the federal government's decision to deploy military on the war of drugs against cartels led to a 5-fold increase in violence. But finally, Senator Conda in questioning argues that the only alternative is standing by and watching cartels commit violence. Here's the thing. The Global American, a high-level working group on inter-American relations and bipartisanship, finds that instead of just continuously targeting cartels and trying to decrease supply, a more peaceful and effective solution is to decrease the demand for drugs here in the United States by tackling the issue of substance abuse. If Americans stop buying drugs, then cartels have nobody to sell them to. Senator Liu, I'll agree that sending aid to Latin America is good, but let's just not attach military troops on the ground with it. And Senator Landsman, I too want to help our fellow women, but we can do that without dragging innocent people into the fight. Every single one of us here today wants to help our constituents in Latin America. But if you truly want to keep your promise of protecting those you are sworn to, there's only one way to vote at the end of today's debate.
Thank you, Senator Peng, for that speech of 3 minutes and 55 seconds. We're now in line for 2 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please rise. All right, to the standing, I'll go first to Senator Juneja.
Hi, Senator. So this bill supports the creation of judicial infrastructure in Latin America, right?
Yeah.
So wouldn't that make it easier to prosecute, say, cartel leaders or people who are corrupt in government positions?
That's assuming we catch them in the first place. As we've seen in the past, all they do is just spread out the operations, make it harder for us to catch them, and then if we can't catch them,
right. So it's like notoriously true that we have cartel leaders; they just aren't being prosecuted because.
Right. But that's not the base. That is not the base of the problem.
Thank you, Senator Kaiser.
Hey, so why hasn't local law enforcement been able to catch gangs?
Because they don't have the resources to.
I mean, in a lot of situations, they work with them, right?
Yeah, that too.
So Senator Landsman gave an entire speech about how we're improving local law enforcement. Why aren't we empowering states in Latin America to fight their gang problem?
Right. As we've seen in the past, whenever we just make cartels angrier, they become more violent.
Hold on. Can you answer my question?
Right. Local governments are not the sole reason why they're successful. So
but they're a factor, right?
Thank you. And with that, questioning time has last. Speakers are thanked and we return to mute. We're now in line for a speech in the affirmative. All affirmative speakers, please rise. All right, that will go to Senator Kaiser. You stand unopposed.
I thank the chair again for my judges. That's Senator Kaiser, Keyser. Very proud and happy to be speaking for the last time at this tournament. Smile or a nod, and we'll get started. Is that everyone? For my judges that have their cameras off, if you're all here?
Yeah.
Awesome. One of the most innovative stories of the drug industry lies in a single man named Jacques Quetin, a cocaine trafficker who had his hands on Haiti's levers of power. He consistently evaded arrest in the most creative ways he knew how, even sneaking onto a flight disguised as a woman. He was untouchable. But even more amazing than evading the entirety of Haitian national security, his own spouse never found out. There's a difference between ignorance and negligence. And to this day, we've turned a deliberate blind eye to the needs of Latin America and their little drug problem. But they've always been so much more than their drug industry, and it's time we finally recognize that. This room's priority is to give safety and stability to Latin American countries. I think everyone here can agree on that. And so far, Senators Huda, Quesada, Peng, and the rest of the negation have based their opposition on our poor treatment of Latin America in the past. These concerns are not unfounded. Our policies in those areas have been abysmal and destructive. But with this policy, the open-ended enforcement mechanism discussed by Senator Kanda allows us to learn from our mistakes for the first time. That's why this bill is different. We passed today for the sole reason that we improve counter-narcotics operations in Latin America. Now, the best point we've heard so far from the negation was Senator Peng's argument that American counter-narcotics have historically caused more harm than good because we had a shoot first, talk later attitude towards preventing drug crime. Here's why that point flips to my side. We're currently in the process of reevaluating our anti-drug strategy, and this bill commits to fund it under Section 2, Part 3. Here's why. Catherine Osborne from Foreign Policy explains on October 15th of 2021 that we're turning away from the kingpin strategy that splintered and multiplied Mexican drug gangs instead of eliminating them. We just replaced the failing Merida initiative in Mexico with the new bicentennial framework, which has a new emphasis on economic alternatives to organized crime, promoting human rights, and increasing investigative abilities. Senator Peng, instead of killing gang bosses like we both agree is harmful, the framework aims to reduce drug use through public health programs and preventative strategies in Mexico. The Congressional Research Service furthers on April 7th of 2022 that the framework's pillars include treating addiction through a public health lens, preventing the diversion of precursor chemicals to illicit drug production, and combating illicit financial networks. And guess who made this policy? The Secretary of State and the Biden administration. The same people who create this plan. When we pass this bill, we're not automatically returning to the old status quo of anti-drug policy. We're expanding a new model that will actually work. So what happens when we turn to a safer, more effective way to reduce crime? We eliminate the single biggest barrier to safety and stability in Latin America. Senator Huda, you say we need to help them economically. I'd argue that by cooperating with Latin American states to fight their drug trade safely, we help them become more sustainable and self-sufficient. We've heard a lot today from Senator Kanda and Liu about the harms caused by financial instability. So I'm shocked to be the first one to explain how crime is the main reason they've been unable to develop their economies. A February 2017 report from the Inter-American Development Bank quantifies that the direct cost of crime and violence in Latin America and the Caribbean is $260 billion every year, roughly what the entire region spends on infrastructure. When we help Latin American states effectively fight crime and the drug trade, we double the amount of money local governments have for economic development and infrastructure. That reconstructs how you should view this round. By passing, we give Latin America the tools they need to build themselves back up. Senator Quesada, I just told you that President Biden is already turning away from our old imperialist policies. Your point falls. Senator Huda, you tell us that this bill does nothing to turn countries away from China. But fighting crime directly fights Chinese economic imperialism by making Latin American economies more sustainable. The best way to save the lives of millions suffering from economic inflation or drug crime is to reform the policies keeping them there. That's not a choice, it's a responsibility. Our failed war on drugs has left Latin America in a place where they can't sustain themselves. If nothing else, we owe them this. Pass.
Thank you, Senator Kaiser. Unfortunately, time has elapsed. Thank you for that speech of 4 minutes and 11 seconds. In the future, please try to be more aware of the grace period. That being said, we're now land for 2 blocks of questions. Questioners, please rise. All right, that'll first go to Senator Peng.
Hey.
So this legislation outlines efforts to disrupt, degrade, and counter drug trafficking. How is that a public health program?
Okay, so again, the person that creates the legislation that we're discussing here is the Secretary of State. They've already developed their plan and how they're going to counter narcotics.
Okay.
And in this case, that means working with local officials to, again, improve public health and make sure that people don't need to turn to organized crime.
So why don't we do that instead of trying to disrupt the routes that drug criminals take?
That's what that policy is meant to do. The difference is they're not using violence to do it.
Thank you, Senators. And with that, questioning this block has ended. Just before we move on to the next block, I just want to make sure, Judge Aga Otogile, is your connection all right? I think you had 2 accounts in this.
Yes. No, my computer, something just happened. I'm going to wait for it to kind of reboot. I'm here. It'll come back on. I'm here.
Okay, I'll get that.
Just to check for my judge, you did manage to hear my speech, correct?
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
All right. That's great to hear. Next question will go to Senator Hassan Ali.
Hey.
Hi, Senator. Can you tell me exactly why the Merida initiative was ineffective?
Okay, so the main factor was they used the kingpin strategy, right? Which is basically they'd send the military into Mexico, go kill drug lords, and then what would happen was the gangs would split up into a lot of smaller gangs that would then get desperate and commit violence.
So, Senator, a very large part of that problem was we had our metrics of success dependent on the Mexican government. How does that change under this legislation?
Okay, so the bicentennial framework specifically addresses that. The U.S. government evaluates the metrics of success.
Thank you, Senators. And with that question, time has last. Speakers are thanked. Thank you. All right, we're now online for speech in the negation. All negative speakers, please rise. All right, between those standing, that will go to Senator Biram off of recency.
Hello, everyone. That's Senator Biram, spelled B-E-E-R-A-M. This is my final time speaking in today's legislative session. I'm really happy to be here. Could I please get a verbal indication if any of my judges are not ready, and I'll get started shortly.
Quick note to the chamber. I think we only have one senator stand for the last affirmative speech. So we're going to need an affirmative speech in the next one. So please try to make sure that gets prepped. I know you guys can all do it. You guys are in finals for a reason. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
I know that 3 of my judges have their cameras off, just making sure everyone is here.
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. When the Monroe Doctrine was established in 1823, it asserted that an interventionist approach to military strategy would be implemented across Latin America. Accordingly, it became necessary to understand the limitations of the expansive American promise. Again, we've come to a similar crossroad in policy. As Latin America faces strife and conflict from both inside and outside their borders, the question now becomes, how do we react? It is ultimately because this bill reduces interventionism to impulsive international grandstanding that I am failing. Now, we have reached the end of this debate, and still, my side has completely missed the mark on their own advocacy. They've given you edge cases about the government and foreign countries where this might be a problem. I am going to spend my next 4 minutes focusing on the civilians themselves, proving to you the ultimate harm of the affirmation. This is what you vote off of. The principal reason I am failing this legislation is because the offensive approach leaves Latin America in shambles. Now, Senator Quesada told you about the dangerous effect of security forces. I want to give this far more attention and bring it back, because even if you buy every single argument the affirmation has told you, this goes far beyond everything that Senator Quesada told you. Now, Craig Deere at the National Defense University Press found in June of 2020 that historically, American security agreements and intervention have been met with extreme public hostility and backlash. But why is that true? Because American intentions rarely align with Latin American interests. Senator Conda and Senator Landsman, let's stop acting like experts in military strategy and start actually listening to experts in the field itself. What does this actually mean? This is the underlying warrant behind why William Leo de Grande wrote in the World Public Journal that over the last 2 decades, while American security assistance and anti-narcotics efforts both doubled in Latin America, 55% of Latin Americans would choose authoritarianism over a democratic government, with anti-American sentiment doubling in that time. This is the explanation my side has conveniently forgotten to tell you, quantifying that the affirmative optimism is wholly misguided. Senator Landsman and Senator Kaiser, that sole statistic literally proves that your argument does not hold up. Senator Liu, that is over half of the population of Latin America, embroiled in an incessant cycle of inescapable bloodshed. Make no mistake, there is a reason why we do not entertain discussions like this outside of the current context. It literally is absolutism. But why is this so harmful? Senator Conda, Senator Landsman, and the rest of the affirmation, when you tell us about more stability, I could not disagree more. Instead, you strengthen the vice grip of terrorism and gang recruitment in Latin America by pushing people towards extremism. In fact, Ivan Berkose at the Journal of Complex Operations found just last year that as the prevalence of authoritarian regimes increases, there is a direct statistical correlation to the growth of gangs. Senator Landsman, it does not matter if you have better law enforcement if more innocent people are joining gangs in the first place. Senator Peng was right, but for the wrong reasons. This means more cartel violence, more collateral damage, and more narcotics running rampant in the streets, only increasing the human cost of this Congress's hubris. Everyone has been looking for a way to end this cycle. I am telling you, this isn't the answer. From the Monroe Doctrine of the 1800s that I told you right now, to the dollar diplomacy of the 1900s, I showed you at the beginning of this session of Congress. It seems like this legislative docket has been a harrowing reminder of the mistakes we have made throughout Latin America's past. In the 2000s, I asked this Congress, are we doomed to repeat them?
Thank you, Senator Biram, for that speech of 4 minutes and 5 seconds. We're now in line for 2 blocks of questions. Questioners, please rise. All right, between those standing, that goes first to Senator Landsman.
Hello.
Senator, so considering that under every stipulation of this bill, words that promote peace, and even in the law enforcement clause saying that they will work to promote universal human rights, why is that such a bad thing when we're working to improve solidarity with Latin America?
Sure.
Is
So
this not righting our past wrongs?
First, 6 out of the 7 literally say security involvement. That is often militarily. Secondarily, you have to prove why international intervention is a good thing. I would argue international intervention has never been a good thing anywhere.
Thank you, Senator Condon.
Can we intervene?
So are the problems that you tell me about like poor security forces and like corruption in the security forces prevalent in the status quo?
No, that's not at all what I told you. I told you that an increased American security presence increases anti-Americanism and as a result, authoritarianism.
Okay, where does it say we're putting American boots on the ground?
Under the security force of this legislation.
No, it never says the American military.
My entire side has told you, you can't ignore past precedent.
I don't care what your side tells me. I care about what the bill says. The bill never says we're putting boots on the ground.
Have a precedent.
Thank you, Senators. And with that, questioning time has elapsed. Just a quick note before you proceed on to the next speech. As a friendly reminder, try not to talk over each other in questioning, as Zoom will put both your voices together, and it's sometimes hard to make out. That being said, we're now in line for a speech in the affirmative. All affirmative speakers, please rise. All right, I'll go to Senator G. Beck off of Recency.
I thank the chair. This is Senator G. Beck, spelled B-A-E-K, speaking for the second and final time this legislative session. If my judges and parley can just give me any indication if you are not ready. Otherwise, I'll go ahead in a couple of seconds. Okay. Looks like we're good. Let me just get set up and I'll begin. The very Monroe Doctrine that Senator Biram just mentioned has been violated over and over again since its establishment nearly 200 years ago. In the present day, with countries influenced by various global powers, today's legislation finally takes a different step to achieve the goal we failed to achieve for centuries: protection for Latin American nations. First, Senator Huda and Quesada bring Chinese influence to the table as a reason to fail, but their entire argument relies on the fact that Latin American countries under the BRI would prefer to stay under the BRI than getting aid from a different country. Now, that's empirically false, and let's finally quantify why. The Diplomat tells us in November 2021 that China has forced BRI countries into a crippling debt of about $380 billion. Now, why would BRI countries want to ally with a nation that's literally trapping them into billions of dollars of debt as leverage? The simple answer is that they won't. And according to CNBC in January 2019, some countries are already scrapping entire BRI projects, indicating that they are now willing to prioritize their interests over their need for foreign investment. So if Chinese influence is so bad in the status quo, Senator Huda, we pass because in the affirmative world, we finally counter that influence. But next, Senators Peng, Huda, Quesada, and Biram on the negation are concerned that we are enabling violence against civilians under this legislation. But I would instead argue that their concerns are the exact reason why you need to pass. Senator Honda started this debate claiming that today's legislation combats corruption, but not one affirmative speaker since then has quantified to you exactly how effective our past efforts have been, not only against corruption, but also against violence in the region. Allow me to be the first speaker in this entire debate to specifically show you why and how our anti-corruption efforts are so successful and so necessary against violence against civilians. Let's take a look at the Northern Triangle, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador to see why this is the case. Morgan Magazine tells us in 2020 that between 2014 and 2017, the US spent $750 million in aid to the Northern Triangle, tailoring anti-corruption programs like this legislation that were immensely successful. They decreased Honduran murder rates by 76% and brought 89,000 civilians out of abject poverty. However, although these commissions have been so incredibly effective, they fizzled out because, as the Congressional Research Service tells us in February of this year, due to decreased support during the Trump administration as well as insufficient resources, many of them expired. That's why instead of failing, you pass to reinvigorate commissions like these to counter bad state actors and to increase government transparency, decreasing homicide rates and violence rates. Senator Buren, your reason to fail is a reason to pass, because the reason there's so much conflict right now is because of our complacency. This leads to the biggest impact in the round. You pass to save human lives. For the last decade, civilians have suffered from violence without any local governmental action. The Congressional Research Service says last October that rampant natural disasters have exacerbated economic failure, increasing the number of families in food insecurity by 6 million in the last 3 years. But also, as gangs like MS-13 engage in brutal violence, it's innocent civilians that are caught in the crossfires. In fact, the UN tells us that at least 71,000 Salvadorans and 247,000 Hondurans have been displaced internally by violence. However, corrupt governments have failed to act, leaving them drowning without any lifeline. Today's legislation finally invests more resources into efforts to counter corruption in the government itself. This has had significant impacts in the past, as the Washington Office on Latin America explains in 2019 that in Guatemala, anti-corruption probes indicted their former president and vice president, prosecuted dozens of corrupt government officials, and Senator Pang, they detained the exact drug traffickers you told us about, cutting homicide rates in half. For far too long, we've stood on the sidelines as the Monroe Doctrine has been violated time and time again. It's high time we affirm.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 6 seconds. We're now in for 2 blocks of questioning. Questioners, please rise. All right, between the standing, I'll go first to Senator Buren.
Hey, Senator. So if civilians mistrust American forces, why is a 55% increase in authoritarianism better than the status quo?
I would say that a lot of the measures under this legislation are authoritarianism. Rather, they're trying to root out corruption in their own government.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they don't trust American presence in the region. If we enter the region, then anti-American sentiment increases. How is that a good thing?
Regardless of that, I think it's been empirically proven that we
can just ignore that. Like, that's a pretty big impact.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Quesada.
Let's talk about China. So you say that countries are already scrapping projects, right?
Yeah.
So why can't they do that without having to go back to the US, which has caused all of these war crimes and crippled these nations arguably worse?
The problem with the BRI is that they're debt trapping these countries under the BRI. So we're the only alternative they have if they want to build more infrastructure and improve their economy.
Okay, but our alternative is not just like debt trapping, but also like banning LGBT rights and stuff like that. I would argue that we should not have.
Thank you, senators. Questioning time has elapsed. And with that, we're now in line for speech in the negation. All negative speakers, please rise. All right, that'll go to Senator Hassan Ali.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. That is Senator Hassan Ali speaking on the negation. If anybody is not ready, feel free to let me know.
And just a quick note of the chamber, it looks like we have 2 speakers that haven't spoken yet, but I think we had 3 people actually stand for the last affirmative speech, meaning splits wouldn't be balanced. If you haven't spoken yet and are on the affirmative, can you please consider flipping to the next so we have even debate? I'm sure the judges would love it. All right, thank you so much. Go ahead, Senator Hassan Ali.
Thank you, Mr. President. We all good to go? Okay. Composer Lin-Manuel Miranda in the musical Hamilton posed a question in one of the rap battles. He says, if we try to fight in every revolution in the world, we never stop. Where do we draw the line? And ironically, that's also the question I have to ask this Congress when tackling the problems of Latin America. Now, this debate has gotten very muddled. So let's actually go through and clear up why exactly you're voting to negate. Firstly, in questioning, Senator Liu and Huda went back and forth about Chinese influence. Senator Huda is absolutely correct, but here's the warrant that he's missing. The issue is that no matter how hard we try to get involved, Latin American countries have no incentive to work with the US, considering the convenience and benefits they get from China. Senator Liu, It doesn't matter whether we have a provision regarding the rights of minority communities. In the words of your own speech, we aren't preventing the flood of Chinese control. That happened a long time ago. The diplomat quantifies how strong of a chokehold that China has on Latin America. Chinese companies have engaged in multilateral agreements, including through the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, so they could specifically exclude the US and Canada when coordinating engagement plans. So when Senator Liu tells you that these countries are suddenly favorable to working with the US, that's incorrect, and it's only been proved with the pandemic. COVID has made this region even more susceptible to Chinese control because China has served as a provider of vaccines and medical support, a purchaser of their commodities, and a source of loans and investments for major projects. Now, why does that even matter? China has been working on this leverage for 2 decades now. They have effectively suffocated these economies to the point where no plan brought up by the state government will fix these economies. Senators, throwing money at a broken system does not fix it. They don't have a reason to increase economic relations with the US when all of their needs and more are being met with China. But let's take the affirmative on their highest ground and assume that in their ideal world, China doesn't have this leverage. You're still going to negate for one key reason. Every single time that the US has tried to involve itself with the drug issues, we've failed. Year after year, we are blinded by the mentality that America can fix all of the world's problems. So let me bring you back to reality with past precedent. And it's not as ridiculous as Senator Landsman told Senator Huda that it was. I actually think that the issues that Senator Conda spent his sponsorship talking about are very important. And the US government agrees. That's why they've tried nearly every method under the sun to involve themselves. Here are some specific examples, because this is where my side has failed you in this debate. When we enacted the Merida Initiative, we attempted to stop drug trafficking in Mexico. But according to the US ambassador to Mexico, the problem was that cartel kingpins live there. So their apprehension depends on the actions of the Mexican government. And then fighting fire with fire has led to an escalation in the number of deaths. This bill doesn't fix that, Senator Kaiser, but for the war on drugs in the Northern Triangle, a more recent example, it has costed billions of taxpayer money while actually increasing the violence since gang members and drug dealers fight for control. Every time the US has tried to get involved in the drug crisis, we failed and we only made it worse. Senators, it's just like Hamilton the musical. There are a million things that we haven't done, but let's add passing flawed foreign policy to that list. Negate.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 4 minutes and 6 seconds. We're now on for 2 blocks of question. Questioners, please rise. Between the standing, I'll go first to Senator Rubis.
So we're currently involved in these drug things, right? Like the harmful policy you talk about is still going on, right?
So the Merida Initiative is not, but our war on drugs in the Northern Triangle is.
Right. So if the point of this bill is to change our current policy, analyze what's not working and change it, isn't the worst case scenario the current bad involvement?
So I would argue that that worst case scenario is enough to make us negate. I'm not willing to increase these violence for these countries.
If the worst case scenario is the status quo, what does this bill make worse?
Thank you, Senator Gbeck.
Going with the previous line of questioning, isn't this a strategic plan for the entirety of the Western Hemisphere, including 8 different sections? So what about this legislation uniquely makes the status quo worse considering everything else?
So simply, the US mentality that we can get involved in these Latin American countries in the capacity that this bill outlines will fundamentally make the problem worse. Okay. I provided you with 2 examples of past precedent to demonstrate that.
Okay, so even if we have that mentality, how does this—
Thank you, Senators. Questioning time has elapsed. Speakers are thanked and we return to Muse. Just a quick note before we proceed, just out of an overabundance of caution, Judge Aga Togile, I think you had 2 accounts, and 1 disconnected. Is everything good on your end? Just making sure. Judge, could you hear us? Judge, I think you're muted. Yep.
What about now?
That's great. Yeah.
Okay. Again, sorry. Yeah, I'm having some tech issues on this computer.
But you're completely fine. You're able to hear everything though, right? Just making sure.
Absolutely. I've missed nothing.
That's great. Great to hear. All right. In that case, we'll now move into speech in the affirmative. All affirmative speakers, please rise. All right. I'll go to Senator Rubis. You stand unopposed.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. Senator Rubis, same name, same face. Second time today. Proud to be on the affirmation. Judges, let me know if you're not ready, and I'll get started soon. Beautiful. It seems like everyone's good. I'll get started. Growing up in a household with my mom, the one and only Wendy Rubis, motivational quotes were a lifestyle. Whether it was telling me to reach for the moon on my first day of kindergarten, or reading me her favorite page of the most recent Oprah book during 5th grade graduation. But the one cliche platitude that stuck with me most is treat others the way that you want to be treated. And I'm not just talking about buying Senator Khan lunch so he buys you dinner. You see, for far too long, America's strategy has been to punish countries instead of giving them the support they deserve. It's time we start treating other countries the way we want America to be treated. Pass this bill. The $1 million question in this debate should be pretty obvious. What is the best way for this Congress to approach issues in Latin America? Senator Huda, Biram, Peng, and the rest of the negation have given valid critiques of our current US presence in Latin America. However, my issue with those arguments is that they are failing the bill and maintaining the current failing policy. Look at it this way. If you do nothing by failing this bill, the current harmful policy the neg tells you is so bad just continues. Take a look at the impact of that. The International Crisis Group reported on July 14th of 2021 that US sanctions on Central America have killed 100,000 jobs and worsened political turmoil. The Cuban trade embargo has cost innocent citizens $1.1 trillion, and the sanctions on Venezuela have killed 40,000 innocent civilians. I am in agreement with the negation that our current policies in Latin America are failing, but the whole point of passing this bill is to change those policies. If our current military and drug approaches are bad, the point of this bill is to come up with new solutions that are more effective. Senator Peng, the Department of State and the Department of Defense have access to the statistics you read us about failed drug policy, so they have the information to design new, more effective drug programs under this bill. Senator Huda, if our current approach to military in Latin America is failing, that sounds like a good reason to review that policy and find ways to improve it. It's just like I told Senator Hassan Ali in cross-examination. If you fail this bill, the harmful policies only continue. The point is to improve them. But secondarily, this bill gives us a check on harmful policy that everyone has missed. Read Section 4 carefully. After the report is created, we have 90 days before the policies go into place. If today's legislation constitutes an expansion of harmful policy, we have a 3-month window to prevent that harmful policy from going into place. Senator Hassan Ali, if you fail this bill, the United States is still fighting the war on drugs. But if you pass it, we'll get a new solution and be able to debate the merits of it before it goes into place. An educated policy has worked before. Here's the historical precedent my entire side has missed. The Congressional Research Service reported on January 22nd of 2019 that the last time the Secretary of State submitted a report to Congress detailing issues in Latin America, we passed more progressive policies like humanitarian assistance and avoided aggressive sanctions. As a result, over 5 million people throughout South America and the Caribbean were pulled out of poverty. That's what happened when we make informed policy, rather than just talking about issues with the status quo, working to improve them. Senator Peng, in your worst case scenario where this bill improves nothing about our current drug policy, we have 90 days to get the Department of Defense back in check. Don't fail this bill and leave them without the check. Instead, create a new report on the best ways to improve our policy and actually make things better, rather than sticking with the failing status quo the negation has told us so much about. I'll be honest, Rubis family advice isn't always the best, but I think my mom is on to something in this one. We live in a diverse world of diverse people, all with their own stories to be heard. I say, it's time we review our policy, look at what's working, look at what's failing, and finally create working solutions. So from one family to another, I ask you, pass this bill.
Thank you, Senator Rubis, for that speech of 3 minutes and 55 seconds. We're now in line for 2 blocks of question. Questioners, please rise. All right, team that's standing, I'll go first to Senator Huda.
Hi, Senator. What's the guarantee a new military or drug solution works if none of our past solutions have?
There's no guarantee. That's why we have a 90-day check to make sure there's not more harmful policy in this bill.
Yeah, so when we make the strategy in 90 days, don't we have to apply the strategy to see if it works?
That's not what I'm saying. So the strategy gets created, then we have 90 days to review it to see if we want to go forward with it or not. If it doesn't work, we just won't put it forward.
I mean, how do we know if it doesn't work if we don't put it?
The same way we're debating this bill. We look at the facts, look at what's worked before, and look at the report.
Thank you, Senator Payne.
Hey, in what way is disrupting and degrading trafficking and their supply lines not inherently violent?
I mean, I think the whole point of the report is to create a different solution. Even if it ends up still being violent, that's why we have the check, but we're still trying to break down the structures of these drug cartels.
Right? If the intent of this legislation is to combat their supply lines physically, then how is that not going to lead to more violence? How is that going to be anything different from the past?
The point of the bill is to change it, and if it doesn't, we have a chance to prevent that from going into place.
Thank you, Senators. And with that, we're now in line for speech in the negation. This will be our last speech. All negative speakers, please rise. Once again, calling on any negative speakers, please rise. All right, the chair highly frowns on a one-sided debate, but will break cycles, seeing as we only have one speech left. All affirmative speakers, please rise. Senator Janeja, the floor is yours.
All right, I thank the presiding officer, and for everyone's reference, I'm Senator Janeja. This is going to be my second and last time speaking today, and I'm happy and proud to be closing out this final round of the TOC. So can I get any sign from my judges if y'all aren't ready? If not, I'm going to hop right into it. Let's do it. Every day before Congress, this chamber takes the Pledge of Allegiance, which ends with the phrase, liberty and justice for all. Yet for too long, millions of people have been subjected to unimaginable oppression simply because they live south of our border. To finally pursue liberty and justice in Latin America, we affirm today's groundbreaking legislation. At the end of today's debate, every argument on my side, from Senator Conda to Rubas, has been predicated on the assumption that when we pass today, we decrease corruption, making our aid finally effective. And every argument on the negation, from Senator Huda to Hassan Ali, is predicated on corruption making our aid ineffective. It's clear, whichever side proves that corruption decreases in Latin America should win today's debate. Let me finally pick up where the rest of my side has left off. So far, every single person in this round has overlooked Section 2, Subsection 4, which mandates that we pursue institutional, judicial, and legal reform in Latin America. Let me use this subsection to end today's debate. Michael Weber, a foreign policy analyst, found for the Congressional Research Service on May 27th of last year that when working with foreign governments without functioning legal systems, USAID and the Department of State have now created a new policy to fund proper judicial systems that prosecute corruption by reopening courthouses and increasing spending to hire impartial judges and ensuring they can't be bought out. These initiatives have been wildly successful. Everyone on the negation, from Senator Biram to Huda, has been asking for global past precedent. Let me finally provide those crucial statistics. The U.S. Department of State found in 2017 that in Somaliland and Eastern Africa, U.S. judicial development programs created proper court systems that resulted in a 1,000% increase in the prosecution of corrupt officials and powerful gang leaders and warlords in the region. Fundamentally, this bill expands those effective court systems throughout Latin America. What does this argument mean for the rest of today's debate? First, let's talk about China. Senator Liu made a really crucial argument proving that Chinese aid and involvement is exponentially worse for human rights and the economic situations for everyone in Latin America when compared to our aid and involvement. But every negation senator, from Senator Pang to Hassan Ali, have rightly questioned whether this policy will displace Chinese influence that has been building up for 5 years. Let me finally answer their concerns. The reason why we displace Chinese involvement is because of these court systems. The Washington Post found in August of last year that China and the BRI get countries to sign on despite the government officials in the country knowing China is predatory with their loaning programs by bribing government officials with unmarked aid. With this 1,000% more effective court systems in Latin America when we pass, that changes, leaving China without a way to expand their influence through bribery. Secondly, Senator Landsman told you about law enforcement initiatives that target cartel leaders and did a really good job explaining the impacts of that, but was questioned by Senator Pang and the rest of the negation on what happens after these leaders are caught. Normally, in the status quo, almost all of them go free, but with 1,000% more effective courts, we finally hold cartels accountable. But finally, you can use every 4-minute speech on the negation from Senator Huda's to Senator Pang's to San Ali's for my side. Senator Huda, you're worried that corrupt governments will use our military aid to oppress their communities? Well, by creating avenues to legal recourse that actually work, we ensure that can't happen. Senator Quesada, you're worried about harmful law enforcement initiatives under this legislation. Understand that if there are any legal violations, they will be held accountable in effective courts. Senator Biram, we allow people to effectively prosecute the authoritarianism you're worried about when we pass. And Senator Pang, this bill is how we uniquely combat cartels through these court systems by finally putting them behind bars. For too long, liberty and justice has been an empty phrase that this Congress has never acted on. Change that by passing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Janeja, for that speech of 4 minutes and 7 seconds. We'll now move into our last two blocks of the session. All questioners, please rise. All right, between those standing, that will go first to Senator Kaiser.
Hey, okay, so I'm on your side, but I do want to clarify. Does this bill do anything explicitly for legal institutions?
Yes, it does.
Where does it say that?
About institutional legal aid under subsection 4.
Okay, it talks about law enforcement institutions. It talks about transparency in their government. It doesn't say that we're going to be going out there and building courts for them.
That's exactly what USAID and the Department of State does when we're working with lengthy initiatives like I proved in Eastern Africa. That's the whole point of what we're doing there.
Okay, but again, are these court systems realistically going to all of a sudden fix every problem in Latin America?
Thank you. With that, last questioner, Senator Gloria.
Hi.
So are drug cartel leaders going free in the status quo because they're getting free by the court systems, or is it because they don't even go to the court systems in the first place?
There were numerous times where the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel have been put in Mexican court systems, but haven't been actually prosecuted because they've bought out juries, bought out judges, large situations like that.
What's preventing them from buying out those judges even under this legislation?
That's the whole point of what the U.S. court systems do. They make them 1,000% more effective by opening courthouses and ensuring judges don't get bought out by increasing their.
Thank you, senators. And with that, questioning time has elapsed. Seeing as that was our last speech and we've actually exhausted our agenda, the chair will unilaterally move to call for orders of the day. Those will take us through previous questioning on this piece of legislation and eventually adjourning. All those wishing to pass legislation FB, the Western Hemisphere Security Strategy Act of 2022, please raise your placards and keep them up until I tell you to put them down. I'll give you a couple seconds to raise your placards. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, all those against. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, are there any abstentions? There should be none. All right, seeing none, this legislation does pass on a vote of 7 to 5 to 0. Just really quickly before we adjourn, I just want to say a word of thanks. Firstly to the chamber, great job today. You guys got through 24 speeches and 56 questions, and debate was overall really great. Thank you so much to all of you. Additionally, this will actually be my last time speaking on the congressional floor as I'm a senior, and this will actually be my last round. So overall, I want to say a word of thanks to the congressional debate community. I actually moved here from South Korea just 4 years ago, and back then I didn't really know anything about American government. But just overall, I've met the greatest teammates ever, some of whom are in this round, the greatest, closest friends ever, some who are also in this round, and some great judges and some great tab directors, mentors, and coaches. Thank you so much for everything that you've done for me over the last 4 years. And I just, so much thanks. You really made a guy who came from 6,000 miles away feel right at home. So thank you so much. And with that, I know that our community also does have a sense of a PO shortage. So as my one last act of thanks, I want to really give back to the community. So I'll be donating this very exact PO spreadsheet that I've been developing for over the past 2 years, along with a YouTube video tutorial attached to it. For any competitors or any people who want to watch this round in the future, maybe you can find the spreadsheet and the attached video tutorial that I made at bit.ly/PO tutorial. That's bit.ly/PO tutorial. And for the last time, I'm Senator Beck, and I'm adjourning and saying bye to this Congress. Thank you so much, everyone.